All right, welcome to the F14 Tomcat Radio Show. We got a heck of a show tonight. Today, we are going to talk with some very experienced landing signal officers, LSOs, paddles, the guys who stand on the back of the ship and grade every landing and get everybody aboard safely, in theory. And that is the job. And we are here to talk about the culture, the training, what it takes to get into that position. And they are naval aviators these days. That is how it always works. You have to be a Navy pilot before you can be an LSO. And we're going to talk about some of the training, how the selection goes. And the guys we got today are pretty experienced guys. Former E2 pilot, Lieutenant Commander John O'Neill, CHIMPO, and I got Commander Brian Roberts, call sign RJ. And did I get the call signs right, guys? Did I say it right, CHIMPO?
Yeah, nailed it. Yep.
All right. Well, I'm excited because both of you guys were CAG paddles, which means air wing qualified paddles, which is just, I believe that's the highest qualification you can get. Am I right about that?
Yeah, with the exception of the kind of the top tier ones where you have Air Land, Air Pac, and the guy in charge of the LSO school, and then the LSO in charge of Sinatra. Those are the top tier ones, but really the pinnacle of your career is your CAG paddles job. It doesn't get any better than that.
So the cool thing about this paddles job is it goes always all the way back to the birth of naval aviation, right? The first aircraft carrier, I believe it was the Langley. I mean, they already had a guy out there basically after a couple of crash landings. They said, we better have somebody out there that can talk these guys down, wave at them, and debrief them on their landings. That's how I understood it start. Is that the birth of the LSO program that you guys know of?
Yeah, and some of the history of it too. I think there was actually the XO of one of those carriers, and it might have been the Langley, but early on. What they realized was he was standing on the back and kind of through his body English, like cringing and moving around one way or another. The pilots actually started seeing that and reacting to like, oh, well, maybe we should actually, formalize some sort of signals. So I think that it started with some informal body language and then migrated to the formal side with the paddles.
So I don't have any statistics from. So they were out there basically with actual paddles, right? They look like ping pong paddles. Is that how the first guys were doing it?
Yeah. Then eventually they kind of they migrated a little bit over time. Holding really stiff ones like, well, that doesn't work too well when the ship's making its wind, to kind of the ones that would flap in the ones with the slats in it. It was all visual hand signals until basically the 1950s, and then the advent of the jets, when pilots were coming in a little bit too fast to actually see, what the LSOs were doing, later 50s. And then that's when we started doing the Fresnel lens system, which was actually a British invention. So we kind of adopted and mirrored after a lot of what the British started. The Brits actually, they called them the batsmen, but it was a similar concept.
So some stats that I picked up was that, straight decks and LSOs, the guys out there actually waving their paddles around, the accident rate in the 50s. I couldn't find anything in World War II, but in the 50s, it looks like 35 accidents per 10,000 landings. Those are landing accidents. And when they went just to the mirrored landing, they reduced that to 7 in 10,000. I'm sure that with the Fresnel lens, and nowadays it's probably nearly insignificant.
Yeah, and part of that too in the 1950s when they had that, and if you think about the advent of the jets and how many different phases they went through with rapidly advancing jet technology and all the different types that they started flying, guys would get used to one airplane, that would get phased out, move on to another. Oh, that one doesn't work as well. So that a lot of strange things being built and tried in the 1950s with the early jets, and then things improved. And actually, for a little while there, they went to just the Fresnel lens, got rid of the LSO, and what they saw was the accident rate actually went up. So then it became a combination of now we use the lens with the LSO on station, and that's where everything kind of started tapering off in terms of the accident rates behind the ship.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. And that, so I think part of that 35-7 reduction rate was probably angle deck too, because we went from straight to angle, and
Absolutely.
which is also a British idea, right? They did the angle deck first, and they had the first catapult. So a lot of carry aviation coming from friends in the UK, it seems like.
Yeah.
So the thing that drew me to being an LSO or wanting to be an LSO, well, first of all, I love airplanes. So it's the greatest air show on earth, standing on the back of the ship watching guys land. But part of what drew me to it was in the training command one before I got my wings was watching these instructor LSOs that taught us how to land on carriers. They had the most colorful personalities, I mean, they were the kind of guys that you wanted to be around and party with and talk about airplanes with. Did you guys have similar experiences in your time period? I mean, tell me about the uh, we had you before, Chimpo. We talked about this a lot and how important the culture is in on the LSO side. What was your impression of that?
Yeah, to me, the culture was everything. And to be completely honest, when I first started, I wanted to be a pilot since I was 2 years old. I had the little flight helmet, the little leather jacket, and my parents would take me to the air shows. It's all I ever wanted to do. And then it ended up happening, and I was like, "Wow, this is a dream come true." And you start going through flight school, and obviously, flight school is supposed to be hard. But I remember for kind of a while, I was like, man, I don't know. I thought it was going to be cooler than this. Like, I wasn't like the vibe. Sometimes it was just a little off. And granted, and you've got a lot of different communities in initial flight school. I mean, every community is teaching. At the time, it was the T-34 Charlie, the old Turbo Mentor, single engine prop. That's what you start on. And so there's a lot of different communities. So the LSO community didn't exist there at all. And then even in T-45s, it's you're drinking from a fire hose a little bit there. And even when we went to the boat, I didn't quite understand the LSO side of things. I just thought that they were the instructors that were like kind of teaching us how to land or whatever. And for me, it wasn't until I got to the RAG, the training command, VAW 120, where just like you said, very, very early on, I realized that there was like a certain group of guys that were always hanging out together. They had the most swag. They were the most fun to fly with as instructors. They were always upbeat. And they just wanted to teach you how to do stuff. And they were just cool. Like they were cool guys. And finally, that's when I finally had like my first realization. I was like, oh yeah, no, this job is cool. Like, thank God, because I was a little nervous that I chose incorrectly. Obviously the flying was sweet, but I was like, I finally found a group of people that I relate to and want to be around all the time. To the point where when I finished RAG CQ and I was heading out to the fleet, I sat down with the skipper of BAW 120 at the time, and he said to me, he's like, hey, do you have any goals for your first operational command? And I was like, yeah, I've got 3 of them actually, sir. I want 1,000 hours in the plane, because I knew that I was going to deploy right away, which is what I wanted. I was like, I want 1,000 hours in the plane. I want to be an LSO as soon as possible, knowing that there was a very select few that actually get nominated and make it through on that job. And then my third goal was that I wanted to come back as an instructor pilot and an LSO, because I wanted to be like those guys, Chuck Klein, Dylan Porter, Malt Carsons. I mean, it's a long list of amazing, awesome Americans that I was like, I want to be you. And not that they're even that much older than you, but you can just tell that the breadth of experience that these guys have and just the way that they carried themselves. I was like, that's who I want to be a part of. And so that, I'll say I love being an LSO even more than a pilot. And granted, you have to be a pilot to be an LSO. But it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And then, once I got back from my first operational tour, that's right about the time that RJ was taken over as the LSO Schoolhouse OIC. And that's my favorite person in the entire world right there on screen. Right? I love this guy. I'd follow him off a cliff. And that's when I kind of doubled down on it. I was like, man, if I can be like this guy, like that's the top. And he's the one that got me my CAG paddles job and sent me on my way. And his LSO signature was literally RJ, senior cognizant LSO of like the US Navy or something like that, which is still how I have him saved in my phone to this day. And I was like, this guy reached the top. Like he's everything. He's the pinnacle. And that's who we all should want to be like. He's the true godfather of the LSO platform. And that's my most proud achievement is making it all the way to CAG paddles and having as many deployments on the platform as I did. It worked out great for me, and I'm so happy it did. And I love talking about this stuff.
I have to agree with you. When I did this stuff in the '80s, the late '80s, and when you showed up, they made everybody every day. They made us tell a joke, right? They to put the class on the spot, and they said, "Today we're going to tell a joke." You had 10 days of FCLPs, and today we're going to tell the joke. And they told a great joke. And then they said, "Tomorrow, one of you students has to tell a joke, and every day, one of you students is going to have to tell a joke." And they were always, raunchy jokes, and they were hilarious. And it started the briefing off with the right tone, like, "Hey, we're here to have fun." And they would make fun of you, and it was this club, and I go, "Man, these are the coolest pilots to be around, right?" And you'd go in their office, and they had stupid pictures on their walls, and they had, you know, Playboy magazine on their desk, and they had a bottle of whiskey in the drawer. I'm not making that up. They pull out the drawer and pour a shot at the debrief. It was like, this is cool. These are like old school. This is what I thought being a fighter pilot or being a Navy pilot was going to be. And what about you, RJ? Did you have the same kind of? Where did you get your inspiration from on there?
Yeah, well, I'll tell that story in a second. But to your points right there, a lot of that history and tradition still continued. And I know for a fact, even as an 05, when I was teaching FCLPs for students, started with a joke, and Chimpo can attest to every lecture I taught at the LSO school started with a joke, and I always start with, "Okay, I got this one," and then the students would have to start chiming in to varying degrees of success. But that culture still carried forward, up until very recently. I haven't sat in the class right there right now, but I know the guy in charge, and I'm sure it's very similar. But yeah, my story. So a little bit behind you, but started out in the 1990s. So I'm down in Kingsville, and it was still a time frame where you had all the different platforms. So you still had the Prowlers, you still had the S3s, you still had the Hawkeyes, Tomcats, Hornets. So you had a smattering of all these different instructors. So it was cool to see a lot of different communities and all that. I will say that the majority of our LSOs were actually Tomcat guys, and you can start seeing early on. It's like, those are some of the guys I wanted to model myself after. They're the more fun, the more dynamic, the more entertaining, kind of guys. The ones that, like, okay, there's something to this culture that's appealing to me, and their style. So I naturally kind of gravitated towards that community, and I already had kind of an affinity for the LSOs, and I really liked them. My most formative experience though was actually the day I carrier qualified. So my best friend and roommate through flight school, I carrier qualified, got out of the jet, was high-fiving him as I'm walking from my jet and he's walking his. And I said, "Hey man, if I can do it, you can do it." And a couple hours later, he got killed on board the Kennedy. He had a blown tire on the cat shot, missed the four-wire by about 6 inches, skidded sideways, and impacted the catwalk. So that was literally the same day I qualified and earned my wings. And I, at that point, vowed something like that was never going to happen in front of mine again. And I was going to be an LSO because I was going to make sure I took care of all my friends and would never let something like that happen on my watch. So that was an extraordinarily formative experience very early on, which deepened my passion to become an LSO. So in my first tour, kind of like what Chimpo was saying, I checked in. I'm like, I want to be an LSO. That's my number one priority. Hey, we'll make you FAC A too. That would be great, but LSO is where I want to be.
Yeah.
So even leaving my first tour, I had a very legendary skipper, OB Honors, great American. He called me
Great guy.
Fox. Yeah, he's like, "Hey, RJ, you're my number one JO. Where do you want to go?" I'm like, "Well, I want to go to the LSO school." And this was a time frame when fit reps didn't matter. He's like, "Well, I can't give you the number one if you want to go there. Go to the RAG if you want to be an LSO. I'll send you to Top Gun, weapons school, wherever you want." No, this is where I want to go. It's like, "Well, you can walk out of here with orders. You can walk out of here with number one." I'm like, I choose the orders because that was how passionate I felt about it. And that's what I wanted to teach. That's where I wanted to be. So, didn't get the number one. But again, fit reps didn't really matter because this is circa 2002. There wasn't even a department head screen and an 04 board and all that kind of stuff. But I was there for about 16 months before CAG Paddle's job opened up, and was fortunate enough to get the last Tomcat cruise for that one. So it was the CAG Paddles for all that. Awesome. So unfortunately, my JO fit rep from Obi right there, they changed the business rules. So as soon as I started my department head tour, like, "You got a great record, you're going to make 05, you're not going to get command." But the silver lining for all of that became when you're not one of those ordained path kind of guys, I was able to finally get back to the LSO school as my 05 sunset tour. So I did 4 years to the day there, and hands down the best tour I had my entire career. Being able to teach, still flying, went out to every carrier qualification that I could, getting some traps with the JOs. I was going to make sure they got more than I did, but still waved. And then it was fun from having started, flying and waving F-14As, S3s, all that, to I'm at the LSO school and I'm waving the first traps for the F-35. I'm waving the first, magic carpet, now precision landing modes. Waved the first traps on the Ford. Did the drone, so waved the drone aboard the ship, and got to see all the old to all the new. So actually, I ended up being the only LSO in history to have waved everything from F-14A through F-35C on every carrier from Kennedy through Ford. So that was kind of a cool feather in the cap in my my LSO career.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
But I mean, it all started a very formative day, August 19th, 1998. But that passion carried through my whole career, and that's why I care so deeply for that community. So
I had a similar experience when I got my wings. Some buddies of mine got surgratted, right, and they went out to the boat, and you guys probably remember the T2 accident where the T2 crashes into the island on the ship, right, and on the Lexington, and what kind of goes along with that is when we went through training in those days, and I'm sure you guys did the same, they showed crash and burn movies almost daily before the brief, right? So we saw all these carrier accidents after carrier. You'd see plane after plane crashing on the carrier, people being killed, ejecting, big fireballs, guys hitting the round down, I mean, planes exploding into millions of pieces, and you're like, what did I get myself into here? I mean, it really was.
Happy Hour at the Oak Club. It's like, why are we doing this?
It's sobering, right? And it's scary. And you go to the ship as a solo student the first time, and you're scared shitless. I mean, you're really trying to control your fear and focus on the task at hand, right? And that's where courage comes in, right? People are always like, oh, that guy's brave. I'm like, there's a difference between no apparent fear of death, doing something just because you're stupid, and actually being afraid you're going to die and then still functioning, right? Because that's where the difference lies. And landing on a ship for the first time is in that area of being able to function in a place where you are scared, because it is frightening.
And that's where training comes in too. And that's honestly where the LSOs make the fundamental difference with that. You find a way to get to that student that is struggling, and to get through to him and to get him aboard safely. And it's a very rewarding experience, qualifying students aboard the ship particularly.
That is the dead truth right there, because when a guy's scared to death and he can't function, and that LSO's voice comes into his ear, that calming effect of going, hey, I've heard this guy's voice before, I got to listen to this dude. That will bring him back to focus, right? Bring him back to center. And that had to be amazing with students.
It's very rewarding. I mean, knowing that you get fleet pilots who struggle, they have emergencies and whatever. You get those guys through, but they've been there before and they've seen all of it. But finding that struggling, CHIMPO as a RAG instructor, same thing. Finding that struggling student and getting him to get that light bulb come on to where he's repeating, the good corrections that we're working on. He becomes predictable from something that was just where is this pass going to go next kind of guy to, you're going to be okay. We're going to get you through. Here's how we're going to fix it day 2. And now that light bulb comes on. And then in the end, hey, congrats, you're a qual. That making that call on the radio is probably one of the most rewarding things an LSO can do. Welcome to the fleet, all that. That's just that's a fun huge thing to say. Yeah.
So before I forget, and CHIMPO, I'm sorry, I gotta focus on RJ for one more question, because I just don't want to miss out on this opportunity.
RJ is the star of the show. You don't have to apologize for that at all.
Well, I mean, so you've flown the F-14, and you've flown all 3 versions, and you've landed all 3 versions of the F-14 on the aircraft carrier, and I assume you've flown the F-18 as well. What can you tell us about your experience between those 3 airplanes, and how different are they?
Wildly different across the board. I started out F-14As with automated flight control, so like the ones you flew before we got the digital flight control mod. So I actually carrier qualified in the automated one, which where you turn in like the roll SAS off and all that kind of stuff. But Yeah, you remember the slimy wing where you've got, I'm sure it's very much like a Hawkeye too. And I got a little bit of Hawkeye time too, but you have to line up inside that left ladder line, and then the airplane would slime itself over the center line. A little sloppy with some Dutch roll and all that, but you got to, used to it. And then we got the digital flight controls in the Tomcat
with no heads-up display, really, right? In the A, the heads-up display was useless.
Yeah, it is useless. In fact, Top Gun Maverick does a very good job of making it look like that's actually what it was. And there's really not that much there. You've got a pitch line, and no velocity vector, no airspeed, no altitude. So you're primarily that heads down display and analog gauges, for airspeed and for altitude. So you actually had a fundamental scan that you had to work. You didn't have auto throttles that worked, at least not reliably in the F-14. And the F-14A, if you got underpowered, it was not going to be a good day. But with the digital flight controls, at least the lineup got fixed, make it a little bit crisper, and it flew more like a modern kind of fly-by-wire, F-18, if you will. So that was pretty good. And I got to the point where in my first tour, I was actually breaking into top hook and top 10 and all that. So I got decent, landing the F-14A and the nuances of that. And you had to respect that airplane more than any other airplane I've ever flown in my life. That was hands down the hardest one to fly. Nighttime, you're putting a filter over, the primary VDI. It's like, oh, take off the night vision one, put this on there, so that you're not blinding yourself with all the green stuff. It's like, this is so ghetto fabulous, but it was a working man's airplane, and you had to respect it, and it was hard, but you could get good at it. And I saw guys that were good at it. And then when I went on to my JO instructor tour when I was at the LSO school, I remember my first, they were just now modifying the F-14Bs with a heads-up display, which actually at the time was better than the Hornet or Super Hornet heads-up display. It was a fantastic piece of gear. So I did my first flight in a HUD aircraft at the beach. My second flight was getting a LSO bag X at the boat. So I've never flown a HUD aircraft ever at the boat. And then I hot switch in for my bag X, and the HUD fails. So the velocity vector was stuck 60 degrees nose down. And I remember my read in the back's like, well, we can't go fly. The HUD's not working. I'm like, what are you talking about? I got airspeed and altitude. This is more than I've ever had. Let's go. We're up. So I shoot and I get 10 traps in a HUD equipped aircraft with a non-working HUD. And I'm like, this is awesome. Airspeed altitude way better than what I used to do. And then the D model was really, really, it was really neat. There's a lot of extra cool stuff in the HUD, like a flight director mode that, is called a mode 1 Delta, where the ship locked you up and it kind of would tell you with a tilting symbology. It's like, oh, move your velocity vector a little to align this. So it's kind of like a fly to thing to help you out and get in the sweet spot for all that. Both the B and the D were very, very similar behind the boat in terms of power and responsiveness. And it was a really powerful jet. But it was harder for me to get good at it right away because there was so much power. You kind of found with the F-14A, you could move the throttles a little bit more, DLC as you needed to, and the Bs and the Ds, it was a really small sweet spot one way or another.
It was a non-linear throttle. That was kind of the issue too, I think,
and
with those bigger motors.
Those big, they were beautiful and they were the most powerful airplanes I've ever flown, but just a little too much, and you could be off to the races in those. But the Bs and the Ds, they're still challenging for all the things. And it never went unappreciated, manning up a F-14 on the deck of a carrier and looking back like, damn, this thing is huge. I got to bring this thing aboard after this.
Yeah.
And CHIMPO flying an even bigger airplane, you know exactly what that's like. But, just looking back over that thing, it was always just impressive. But it was a lot of fun to fly.
Did you do any emergency landings in the F-14 on the ship? Did you ever have the pleasure of doing a single engine or any other issues?
I had a myriad of minor emergencies. I never, knock on wood, had a true single engine. I had some engines I had to shut down, or one that was not putting out really the appropriate thrust. I can't remember exactly what the problem was, but it basically had to be at idle. I didn't actually shut it off. So flying a single engine, had a a significant hydraulic failure that started over Afghanistan, where both hydraulics went down.
Oh,
And
that's
then,
scary.
yeah, when I landed, basically all remaining hydraulic fluid was gone. So they figured I got lucky and I had about like 2 minutes of flight time before all hydraulics would have been gone completely.
Holy cow.
But for the most part, the Tomcat treated me pretty well. I certainly waived my share of emergency Tomcats.
Yeah.
But during my flying career, especially bringing it back to the ship, she treated me pretty well and pretty honestly.
I had a couple no flappers, one stuck slat, and I had a couple single engine landings. I thought the airplane flew fine on one engine, and that was an A with no digital flight controls. It had plenty of power at landing weight.
Yeah, you just had to be on the rudder a little bit more with that, the center line thrust there. But I definitely had some no flaps, which it flew just fine with that. No DLC was like the biggest emergency.
Right.
If the DLC wasn't working, like you're making a call to the LSO, like, no, I need to talk down. Either that or you're hoping for the upgrade, one of the two.
And did you get any traps in the Hornet?
Yeah. So I got just as many flight hours and traps in the Hornet and Super Hornet. So started out transition with 213 and 31. So I started out in E's and F's, and then I never actually got any Charlie traps until I was at the LSO school as the OIC, and they were still flying the Charlie models at VFA 106, and I was instructing those too. So I was able to trap in all the models of the Hornet throughout the rest of my career.
And so when we're talking about, a lot of people think that these airplanes land themselves, right? And, oh, yeah, they can do, but how much of that is actually done out at sea? How much, I mean, and which airplanes are better at it than others? Because some, like the F-14, for example, I never had one that could auto land. I know it didn't exist, really. I mean, they had ACLS, but it didn't work. I don't know anybody that got it to work.
Yeah, in the Super Hornet, I've only done one auto landing, ACLS mode 1, where the ship locks you up and you're riding the Lightning the whole way in. And that was after a 5-day port call in Rio de Janeiro, and I'd spent the entire day on Copacabana Beach the day before, and then had two. I was a senior pilot in the squadron, and had 2 night tanker hops. The first night we pull out of port, and the first one's fine. Second one, I'm like, I'm tired, and I'm going to ride the Lightning on this one, and it worked great. But now with all the enhanced modes, it's not actually auto landing. The pilot is still very much flying it, but how you fly it now is a little bit differently. So you're flying it kind of like an auto throttle approach with how you do it. But what you're actually doing is you're engaging direct lift from the wings. So you've gone from flying on a power curve that we used to do with you modulate power to control glide slope one way or another. Now with the stick, you still have auto throttles, but what it's doing is it's changing the entire wing. So you actually have all the way past normal full flap throw in the Super Hornets, which is monster lift. And then if you're high, you can push forward on the stick and the wing gets real skinny on you. So now you're flying on a lift curve, which is basically instantaneous rather than being on a power curve, and you got to kind of lead the power, then power back off and all that.
So you're flying with the stick, right? Basically, you're and the airplane is maintaining the proper attitude on its own for catching the wire. Is that true or not?
It does. It flies auto throttles. You engage those, so you're still flying an optimum angle of attack. And now, when you move the stick, the wings and the flaps and all the flight control surfaces, they all move together. And it's the same thing in the F-35. Where it will affect now glide slope. So I'm high, I push forward on the stick, the wing gets skinny, but all the rest of the controls change, so the angle of attack doesn't change. So you still stay on speed at the roughly right power setting. I'm just flying down on a lift curve. So now as you come down, you go back to neutral, the flaps dig back down, and you stay on that curve. And there's an enhanced landing mode of that where you see now finally a center ball, and you just hit the button on the nose wheel steering on the stick, and the jet says, cool, I don't know where the ship is, but you pre-program in what the ship's speed is and what the glide slope is. You can actually change whatever that is if mom is doing a couple knots faster or slower. So the jet says, all right, I don't know where the ship is, but you're telling me mom is doing 15 knots and it's a 3.5 degree glide slope, and you're telling me I'm on glide path. So through the aircraft's own internal INS, doesn't require anything from the ship. It just says, I'm going to hold this wire. Hey, wait, there's that rooster tail. Didn't want that little lifty that comes, a little bit further back behind the ship. Tell you what, I'm going to make the wings get skinny for you. Oh, there's the burble. Yeah, you probably didn't want that settle decel. I'm going to give you past full flaps and give you all the way up to mill power automatically. So it's just compensating, saying, I'm going to hold this 3.5 degree wire that compensates for the ship moving forward to hold you on that. Now your velocity vector is actually ship relative. So it's no longer, I'm kind of doing some Kentucky windage to put it out in front of the ship a little bit to guess where the ship's going to be. It's like, that is where you're going. So between the heads up display and how you're now flying in a auto approach that is still a manual controlled approach, it's not ships locked up. You're still flying it, but you can make just a couple corrections and it makes everything easier. You make a lineup correction because the ship's always moving forward and to the right away from you. So lineup used to be kind of that death of 1,000 cuts, and you're killing lift a little bit here and there. The aircraft compensates for you with a combination of lift and a little bit of power is required. So you don't have to add power yourself to compensate for a lineup correction and killing a little bit of lift. It does a lot of the work for you. And it's pretty impressive. It's probably the biggest fundamental change to carrier aviation since the angled deck.
So that makes it easier for the pilot because they don't have to do as much monkey movements with their hand, with their brain's not trying to process 18 things at once. With they can just focus on the glide slope and line up and fly with the stick only, basically.
Yeah, the best way I can describe it is, you in the cockpit as a pilot, time slows down. So as before, like meatball, lineup, angled attack, right back to each other, and then just constantly scanning and, a monkey banging the cymbals and playing the trombone at the same time, just like you're doing in a Hawkeye for every pass. Now your time actually slows down. It's like, oh, it's just meatball. Oh, maybe a little line correction, meatball. Yep, it's still there in the middle. Didn't have to do much. Oh, the ball's a little bit high. You push forward a little bit. All right, there's neutral and kind of back to it. So you're still the pilot, in command. You're making it go where you need it to go. But because everything becomes so much easier, your scan doesn't have to be so hyper vigilant, and you have like the time to see all the little nuances. Oh, there's 12 LSOs on the platform that are today. Oh, ball's still right in the middle. So that it's a pretty nice change.
So the difference is I can see Chimpo is like sitting on the edge of his seat because he's going, this is a bunch of BS, man. I never had any of this automation, right? No HUD, no nothing. So tell us about the E2 experience compared to that. What's your compare and contrast situation?
Yeah, it's none of that. It's everything you guys were talking about the F-14 Alpha with no HUD. That's my everyday, which is fine. I mean, it's how we like it. It's but I remember so Buddy Denham, the guy that wrote the software for it, great guy. In fact, there's a great picture of me, him, and RJ in front of the schoolhouse with cigars and beers right after RJ's retirement ceremony. But I said to him, I was like, buddy, if you ever write this software for the Hawkeye, I will name my first child Buddy Denham O'Neill, regardless of gender. Like, I guarantee you, I will owe you for the rest of my life. It's always been a working man's aircraft, but I mean, we make it work. But for me, it was funny, especially as an LSO. Obviously, I never flew PLM behind the boat, but I got it on the other side as an LSO to where I was not only waving it, but I waved I was the CAG paddles for the first basically 2 deployments where they actually implemented it operationally, and it wasn't fully redundant yet, so we were kind of phasing it in. And the closest I'd ever come to that is I had flown on auto throttles a couple passes at the simulator during LSO school that RJ was teaching. And I remember even then the auto throttle system in the Rhino, flying that in the sim, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never giving these guys the benefit of the doubt again. Like, this is ridiculous. This is so easy. I was like, you guys should not let me do this because the air wing
window is razor thin.
Oh my God. I was like, the air wing GPA is about the tank when I'm on the platform now. This is ridiculous. But I mean, hey, I'd never look down on another guy's good deal. But with the whole PLM thing, it really was eye-opening to me because I got invited out by VX23 when I was still a 120 RAG instructor. So I was still a Hawkeye flight instructor, but RJ had already signed me up to go out as CAG 5 paddles, knowing that PLM was coming out there first. And VX23 invited me out to, I think it was the GW, to go watch and wave their final stages of testing. They were doing their off-nominal high wind day. which I didn't even know was a thing because I'd never spent any time in the test world. I'm not nearly smart enough for that. But these guys are brilliant and phenomenal pilots. And I remember I was up on the platform with a couple of guys. One of them, Magic Legs, he's the skipper of the Jolly Rogers now, actually, was one of the test guys out there. And he's like, hey, man, like I watched a couple passes go by and I was like, this is crazy. Because it was cool because they had on the speaker not only the test pilots calling the ball, but then they were also dictating everything that they were seeing while flying the ball. And I was like, wow, that alone is impressive. But then my buddy Will, he was like, hey, do you want to get on the pickle for some of this? And I was like, hell yeah, I do. So I get on there and he was like, you're going to see some heinous starts, but it's on purpose, I promise. And I was like, all right, like at what point do I wave them off? He was like, let them go to at least the middle and it should be mostly fixed by then. If it still looks like they're going to crash in close, maybe get rid of them, but I don't think we're going to have that problem. And I was like, okay. And I think it was the XO of the command at the time was coming around, and it was supposed to be like an underline low, underline overshooting start with 40 knots of wind across the deck. And I'm on primary, and this is like an immediate wave off, like from like the 90. Like you would never let that continue to the boat. And so he's coming around and he's saying everything he sees is like, he calls the ball and it must have been red. I was surprised he even had one. But all of a sudden, like that plane comes up and he finds center line, he gets it up the glide slope and then basically just releases the controls. And he's describing this as it happens and came aboard, nailed the target wire. And it was like that for the rest of the afternoon. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, my God, this system is the biggest game changer that'll certainly happen in my career, especially as an LSO. And then they were taking a break. The flight deck was resetting. So we go back down and their senior JO test pilot pulls me into, I think it was Ready 5. And he's like, yeah, Chimpo, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, hey, I'm actually going out there as a department head to 115. And I know that you're going to be waving this even before I get there. Like, I've got the full brief if you want. And I had some education from RJ and the LSO schoolhouse as to what to expect, but not to this detail, obviously. And he says to me, he's like, hey, like, how nerdy do you want to get with this stuff? And I was like, just hit me with everything and I'll probably be catching up the entire time, but I'll let you know if I'm too far gone. And he was like, okay. And so he takes me through the entire PLM brief as VX23, the carrier suitability guys did their brief on it. And that guy that was Matt Dominic Pojo, who ended up going on to be an astronaut and just did 6 months in space last year. And that's where I got my initial PLM brief from. And then sure enough, I get out there in 2017, they started bringing it out. We started implementing it. And as great of a system as it was, the implementation was interesting because guys weren't necessarily used to the symbology. We were trying to figure out what was the right number of manual passes before they were allowed to go and fly PLM, only because if the system went down, then you're back to a manual pass. And if you don't have those monkey skills refined, like it's going to be ugly. And so we were figuring out how we wanted to implement that, how we wanted to do your currency reset, because it was like, I think it was every 30 days, guys had to have at least one manual pass to just reset their currency. And so there was an interesting way that we phased it in to make sure that everybody kind of had both skills down. But by the time we got to the 2018 deployment, I mean, guys had it really locked in. And it certainly wasn't a foolproof system, but the consistency went up significantly. And it as much as it takes the workload off of the pilot, it does the same for the LSO, just because it just confines the jet to a much smaller box than you're used to seeing. And that made waving it easier on a lot of occasions, but then it's like you still had to be ready, because every now and then you get some kind of hairball thing go on, and if you weren't used to catching guys because you kind of get lulled into this false sense of security, it was something that we made sure that we were aware of all the time. I was like, hey, like, you never know when something's going to get weird, the PLM system isn't going to work, some nugget's going to come aboard, and we haven't been waving a whole lot of these manual passes lately. So it was something that we always had to be cognizant of. But over the time, like I said, by the time I left there, the guys were really well dialed in, and now it's fully redundant, and that's the way you land now. And it was a huge change from when I started back in 2011 waving to what's going on right now, and it's night and day.
What do you guys see as the difference in safety and boarding rate consistency with this new system? Is it just a big change, or where because in the 90s and the early 90s with normal stuff, with none of this improvements, we still had a 99% boarding rate on deployment. I mean, it was pretty consistent. I mean, what do you guys, do you see it? It's vastly improved, or is it a safety thing?
The numbers pretty much speak for themselves. I mean, the boarding rate is, it's pretty much 100%. So, with the exception of, some hook skips here and there, or maybe one or two, corner cases, but it's damn near 100%. The other thing is, if you look at like the GPA, for most, because all the pilots really care about is the greenie board and, their GPA. But if you're looking at it, you're talking like your average GPA is pretty close to a 4.0. So it's everybody's flying okay passes almost all the time.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's game changing. And what
in the safety side, there's definitely been significantly fewer mishaps aboard the ship, since precision landing modes has been adopted. There's kind of been a flip side corollary that seen in some cases where one, how good are the LSOs, and LSOs are always going to want to be the best out there. But, we all learn, I know CHIMPO and I, LEEKSTER, we learn by, you take that guy that's the corner case, the guy that's outside the box. He's got a really crappy start, really bad pass. How do I get him inside that cone of acceptability and then work with him so he becomes predictable and, able to land in the end? And you got better by learning how to talk to that guy that was outside the box and getting him inside the box. Now LSOs see dart after dart after dart thrown at the target wires every single time, with very little deviation. And to some degree, it can kind of lull you. So now when it's one of those passes where looks good, and oh my God, where did that just come from?
Right.
And, from the pilot side, there can be a little bit of complacency, and we saw it, and we briefed it early on, and we knew it was going to be a thing, that a guy is kind of be like, you know what, the airplane's going to get me there, and I don't have to work that hard. Especially if they engage the modes with just a little low. Well, you're going to be on that low side of glide slope, but that's going to continue to diverge to the low side. And sooner or later, your hook to ramp clearance is not going to be so much. So they get kind of lulled, like, the jet will kind of do it for me.
Yeah, they can nurse a low, which is a big no-no.
Yeah. So, and some guys like, whatever, I'm just kind of along for the ride, letting the aircraft do most of the work. And you saw with it, a couple guys that they became over-reliant on just believing that the aircraft could do, everything for them, and it doesn't. The pilot is still flying it and has to make positive corrections because the jet doesn't know where glide slope is. It's saying, this is where you told me to be. I'm going to keep you here. And guys making late or bad fixes. There were still some of those corner cases. I actually waved the first F-35 cut pass, because the guy just forgot to go to mill power in the trap. So there's still, get things, the fundamentals that guys will forget to do or not do well. But it happens so much less frequently, which can be even scarier because, we grew up with being LSO, you're always on your toes for every single pass.
Yeah,
and
for sure. Yeah.
It's not quite as, not quite as much now. And now you also have a generation who's waved nothing but precision landing mode, with the F-18, F-35, and the only manual passes they've ever seen are Hawkeyes. And then guys that are going on to, train the students and the VTs, the only ones who've ever flown a manual ball are the Hawkeye guys. So it's kind of a very interesting mind, shift change when now the only ones who've ever actually done that manual pass and teaching guys in a manual airplane like the T-45 are the Hawkeye guys who, they're
the real pilots now.
Yeah,
huh?
no jet jockeys who've ever really had to do that much behind the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's I haven't waved since it's been fully redundant. So there was always a little bit of gamesmanship again as far as guys. There was always somebody in a jet flying manual passes, even as I finished my CAG paddles tour. But then when I went on to my department head tour, like my last deployment with the Lincoln, by the end of that deployment, Folks of Follies, all 5 of the top 5 nuggets were 4.0 GPAs, all 5 of them.
That's insane.
So, yes. That's where it got to. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways, but in the same way, just like RJ saying, it left me wondering. I'm like, oh man, like that's, if you're not used to seeing a little bit of color every pass and you just see a dart every single time to the target wire. But if all top 5 nuggets are a 4.0, you're not seeing the variations that you used to, which is part of the end goal, but it can do different things. The second, third order effects of what that does to performance in the LSO platform. It's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, really interesting when you would get into some sort of challenging sea states or whatever. I don't know how
Yeah, and
often they
I've
operate in
waved
that.
at pitching deck. And the nice thing is, you have a lot better response. So especially on on a wave off, I mean, the aircraft when you go to wave off and actually pull a little aft stick, you lose almost zero vertical clearance. So it's still challenging. And by no means am I saying precision landing modes have made landing aboard the ship easy. Landing aboard an
Yeah,
aircraft carrier is always going to be inherently challenging. Your tolerances between a crash and a perfect landing are only 12 and a half feet in the vertical, 20 feet lateral, and about 215 feet horizontal. And that's the tolerances between a perfect landing and a crash. And you're moving at roughly 140 knots, 145 knots the entire time. So it is by no means ever an easy task, even under nominal conditions. And the pilot still has to compensate for everything. It's just giving them a tool to make that infinitely easier than it used to be in the legacy jets that I grew up in, and
sure.
Hawkeye and things like that. And one of the nice things too is because of these capabilities, we can probably start doing things better than we had for the last several years, like blue water operations. Navy kind of got away from that for several years, but now with the capabilities of, I get aboard almost every single time. Do I have to have as many tankers, man? Can I do more blue water, knowing that we're going to get
Oh,
back to first
yeah.
pass every single time? One of my roommates, my first cruise had a day in the barrel where he was an LSO and he bolted 10 times during a day baguettes. He had more bolters than traps.
That's amazing. I
Yeah.
watched a guy in the first couple days of Desert Storm day in the barrel. He went around, I think he bolted or got waved off. I think something like 8 times in the daytime.
Yeah.
It was an A6, but I was just like, holy cow. I felt, and you're sitting in the cockpit, like I'm sitting, I got pulled off in the six pack or wherever they put me to shut down. I don't even remember, but I'm watching this guy and I'm just, your heart is with this poor guy. You're listening to the LSOs and they just can't get this guy aboard, and everyone's like, what are we going to do? And you're going, and so, a lot of folks don't realize how important that is tactically for the ship, for the battle group, and why boarding rate is important because the carrier asset itself is predictable and in a vulnerable position whenever they're launching or recovering
Yeah.
airplanes. So we need to get that done rapidly. That is the key
Yeah.
and that's why that boarding rate is so darn important. That's hilarious. So let me ask you this, since you're the LSO school instructor too, because a lot of people have this kind of misunderstanding of what a ball call is or why or when they do call the ball, right? Because in Top Gun they said Maverick call the ball or whatever. I mean, what can you break that down to like for sixth grade level for people?
Sure. So for standard communications, it's always you're establishing a two-way handshake between the pilot and the LSO. So the pilot gets to that roughly 3/4 of a mile position, and that's where the pass starts and where the LSO takes control. So, nighttime or when you're doing a straight in approach, they'll have you call the ball. So air traffic control is having you fly a normal approach like you would for any runway anywhere until you're lined up to about 3/4 of a mile behind the ship, and then air traffic control will hand you off to LSO. So 3/4 mile, call the ball, and then the pilot will then call the ball, to which the LSO will roger up with normally some sort of voice inflection to let the pilot know exactly who you are, because the pilot hears exactly which LSO is on the pickle. It's like, oh, that's CHIMPO, sweet, I'm going to be in good shape, great dude, I'm going to get an okay pass. Oh, that's RJ, I'm getting a fair pass at best. He's he's the bad cop. Daytime we do a very similar thing. So normal deployment operations, obviously you roll around the corner flying your daytime pass, and we do this communications out just through a series of lights that are on the Fresnel lens itself. So the LSO will say, okay, pilot, you're at the start window, roughly 3/4 of a mile, 15 to 18 seconds ish behind the ship. Hit some lights that illuminate on the top of the lens saying, all right, that's the cut lights, meaning you should see the ball, and I now own you at that point. So you're always establishing some sort of handshake. And then I also, it's CHIMPO test, I teach all the LSOs that, the ball call is one of the most important things you can possibly do, because you're just establishing tone, you're establishing rapport, You know, you're letting that pilot know it's dark, it's scary, the deck is pitching, but you know what? I got you. We're going to get through this together. And you've established that handshake with that. So, you know, the very clinical, you know, Roger Ball, you know, nothing to it, you know, just, okay, it's a meeting at that point. But throwing a little of your inflection in there, a little bit of you know, that can go a long way to, hey, this is a team effort and we're going to work together to affect the outcome of this pass that we want with all this. And then following that ball call, obviously, normally the calls from the LSO are by exception. So if we see a deviation, which LSOs usually see a deviation and start to manifest before a pilot does, we can start giving them corrective calls. So giving them a little advisory calls in nature. Hey, you're lined up a little left. All right. Now we start getting directive right for lineup, and then it becomes a little more imperative. So now the closer you get to the ship, the more that voice inflection has to change with, I was nice before, now I'm going to start being a little bit directive because I need you to do something. And then obviously in the short hairs, it has to become very imperative with strong voice inflections required. Hard power calls, lineup calls is required to make a guy do what he needs to do to get it up and down, you know, over the round down into the wires, or safely lined up one way or another. So
what about the wave off? When would you wave somebody off, and how does a pilot know that they have to go around, that they can't land on the ship?
So we also, it's called the pickle, but you know, on that same pickle shaped, you know, handle that we hold, that we give the Roger Ball cut lights, there's another one that's a trigger that will turn off red flashing lights on the Fresnel lens that a pilot will see and know to go around. So the wave off could be anything from either we lose the winds, so it could be something completely not, you know, endemic to the pilot. It could just be all the environmental factors. There's crosswind limits to landing aboard the carrier. There's minimum required headwinds, so you're not damaging the aircraft or the arresting gear. It could be that some 17-year-old kid on the flight deck decided he was going to run across the jet that his chief told him to go bring this part to, and goes in the landing area at the last second. We have LSOs that are stationed there to look for that, to wave off a guy, to make sure that we're not killing anybody if somebody's in the landing area. Or if the pilot makes a significant deviation in lineup, glide slope, angle of attack, power, something just egregious, or pitching deck environmentals, he gets out of sync with the deck and we're just not going to be able to get him down into a position where he's going to be able to safely catch a wire without either heavy rate descent with the deck coming up, or you know, the deck goes down and he's going to land wrong. It's a judgment call, kind of in those things. And then sometimes you just, the difference between, I was kind of talking earlier between the paddles and LSO, and the paddles is kind of, this is where the art comes in. And this is the passes I've had where you just know this is about to happen. Something is going to go wrong. The jet, there's just a little cue if he's getting a little quieter, you see a little flutter on the flight controls or something like that, because you're monitoring every aspect of it. And it's like, I know it's coming next. And I remember it was a growler, and I was waving, it was student CQ for VAQ 129. I gave one hard power call, and he's above glide slope. And, you know, because his instructor LSO was there on being the controlling, and I'm there in the senior LSO position. My headset overrides everybody else's mics. And I see him coming up, and then I see the aircraft just stop right there as it's going up. And I'm like, I know it's coming next. There's a hard power call. And then before it even starts coming down, I hit the wave off lights. And after I hit the wave off lights, he just keeps coming. It just keeps coming. And I remember I screamed burner, and basically he clears the round down by about 1.5 feet, and then starts upswinging and actually catches the one wire on the fly, slams the aircraft back down. So we pulled the data on it, and essentially from that moment he went hot, and everybody else, like, you know, on the platform looked at me like, how did you know that was coming? I'm like, you know, State Farm
experience.
I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two.
Yeah.
You know, but it was just I just knew it was coming. And you know, we pulled the tapes, and he went to idle for essentially like 6 seconds as he was climbing up, and we didn't really have the external cues, but you just know it. And there's sometimes that's where that art form of truly, when an LSO becomes a paddles, you recognize those subtle cues before it actually happens. And that may be that time where you're hitting the wave off, and you save the guy's life, even though he saw the ball all the way at the top of the lens and you hit the wave off lights, way out there. And then that made the difference between, ramp strike and just a nasty in-flight engagement. And I won't say that was necessarily skill, but that was experience and some of the Zen that you pick up over time that I learned from some of the greats that taught me.
So speaking of that kind of thing, being that paddles and being able to eyeball an airplane and judge its energy state, not just where it is on glide path or whatever, or in lineup, but its actual energy state, and you can kind of get inside the head of the pilot a little bit.
Yep.
When we do Moveless, most people don't know that there is such a thing as Moveless. When would you use what is Moveless, and when would you use it? Because that is truly waving old school World War II style almost waving.
Yeah, Moveless stands for Manually Operated Visual Landing Aid System. So essentially, it's a glide slope on a stick. So we use it when either the lens itself has a casualty. So obviously aircraft carriers have miles and miles of wires and lots of circuit breakers, and things sometimes lose power. So this is something that they can just hardwire into the deck. And if the ship loses stabilization systems or something like that, well, because the glide slope on the lens is stabilized through the carrier's basically inertial navigation. So the carrier is moving up and down in the sea, but that lens compensates through internal gyros to say, okay, here's still the glide slope, even though the carrier is moving up and down. Things like that can fail. There's other times, say the ship, it's also a combat damage kind of thing. So those would be things that we would break it out for. We primarily break it out for training, but I've broken it out several times because there's been an electrical casualty on the ship, and this is the only way it works. So essentially, the LSO has a stick on the platform that is wired back to that manual lens, and we move the stick up, the ball goes up. We move the stick down, the ball goes down. So that's a way that the LSO really kind of earns their pay. And you're not just showing a guy with that manual system where he is, but you're also showing him, this is where I also need you to be. So there may be time, and another great example is pitching deck, where the lens just can't keep up with how much that deck is pitching around because there's stabilization limits. And I need to show you where I need you to be in a piece of sky. So you could actually be showing a guy a high, even though he's physically probably low, because you know that deck is about to drop down on him and he's got to start coming down. Or he could actually be high and you have to physically show him a low, because maybe that deck is raised up so much from the carrier's bow going down into the waves. You've got to get him up and over. So I know my first deployment, we were doing, no kidding, blue water bag X's in the South Pacific with plus or minus 25, 30 feet.
Blue water means that there's no divert. You either get aboard the ship or you're ejecting next to the ship.
Then you got to land here. This is where the food is. Yeah. But we were doing moveless bag X's, which is great for the greenie board because assuming that it goes okay, normally it's a 4.0 pass. We're like, this is awesome. I got a bunch of okay passes.
Right.
But yeah, it's fun, for the LSO because you're really in it there with the pilot, but it takes a lot of training and a little bit of art form to it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And we used it a lot I was on an older ship, the America, which was a Kitty Hawk class, oiler, but, super carrier size flight deck and all that stuff. But the Moveless was a blast to do as an LSO, but we had to use it for real because we were in heavy seas sometimes, and we had an old crappy, Fresnel that wouldn't keep up with the deck pitch rates. And then I remember one time specifically that we were down to the one wire. The 2, 3, and 4 wires were all out of service. And people think of carriers, they have 4 wires. So, well, guess what? Those things break, and machines are machines, and sometimes they get a lot of use and they don't work. And we were down to a single wire. We had a 1 wire, and that was the kind of operations we were doing. So the CAG Paddles was on the Moveless. He was an awesome dude. He was one of my mentors, and I just loved the guy to death. He was an amazing fighter pilot. And he got on the Moveless, and he's trying to get these guys on the 1 wire, right? And guess what? People are boltering. And he's like, guys, you got to stop spotting the deck. And you start to realize when you're using the Moveless, which guys were deck spotters and which guys could actually fly the ball.
So funny side story to that. It was my first crew that Yeah, I think it was my first cruise. But the CAG LSO, Chimpo knows quite well. Sarge Slaughter became captain of the Lincoln.
Great
Great
guy.
American S3 guy. And we loved him so much as CAG paddles. He was flying our Tomcats. And then we brought him over to the Tomcat side. He was in my squadron after that. But we're doing blue water, and it was pitching deck, dark. And I remember Sarge coming up over the radio, 99, we only got one wire, and it's the one wire. So your velocity vector shit ain't gonna work. I need you to fly the ball I'm showing you. Big old Texan, saying that. And it's like, oh, all the Hornet guys feel shame, and now they're, actually having to fly the ball. So it was a pretty fun radio call to hear.
Yeah, and that's where you're really in business as an LSO. And I can also remember that, when guys were boltering or somebody's not getting aboard, and then the phone's ringing, the CAG paddles he's trying to train some guy how to wave who's having a hard time. You got a couple guys bolter, things are not going as well as they should, and then the phone's ringing. It's usually the captain of the ship or the CAG up in the tower, so the air boss, hey, paddles, you gonna get this guy, or what's the problem here? And so now he's trying to explain to the air boss what's going on while we got airplanes in the pattern, and it's a complete mess. And it's very, very, the stress that was on the air wing paddles, of which in my air wing we only had two, was always just two guys. I don't know how it was for y'all, but and those
Japan gets three,
and those guys were on the hook. That was their mission, to get those airplanes aboard. And if you had guys that were not getting aboard, people wanted answers. What's the problem, paddles?
Yeah.
And that must have been very stressful for you guys.
It is, but and naturally your junior LSOs, to the left, like when they see that the captain's, numbers lighting up, and he's talking to you directly, they're like, hey, what the captain want? You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up.
That's good. That's leadership 101 right there. Well done.
So there's some great captains up there too. He was an old department head of mine, and then he became the captain of the Truman, and he would call down just to start messing with me. And same thing, like the captain of the Ford, like some of the guys,
are you wearing your special underwear today?
Yeah. And they just call it
your lucky socks.
I just want to start, BSing, like, oh, it's cold and wet down there. I'm nice and warm up here. Hey, thanks, Captain. But you get a rapport with those guys, which is, it's pretty cool. When you have the captain of the ship, and you're just a senior lieutenant, junior lieutenant commander, and they're trusting you. Like Chimpo will tell you, like, how many times did you have an emergency coming aboard, and you're running through all the recovery bulletins and coming up with the plan, you're briefing the pilot, and the captain's telling you, hey, are you sure we want to do this? Do you want to divert this guy? Captain, we got this. Okay, Chimpo, bring him aboard. And you have a captain of a nuclear powered aircraft carrier deferring to the wisdom and experience of a senior lieutenant.
He's putting his whole career on the line, because if that plane crashes, we just know what happened recently when planes were lost, that guys lost their jobs.
But I remember, as a CAG paddles, the captain of the ship was actually flying. He was a prowler guy, so he was day only, but he would fly. Wasn't a great ball flyer, but he was a great captain. And I remember I was getting my qualification to be the conning officer alongside. So we're doing the aircraft carrier, refueling thing. So I'm up there getting my surface warfare, on, and I make some calls, like, all right, 5 degrees rudder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Captain looks at me and I'm like, you sure, RJ? Captain, do I tell you how to fly the ball? He's like, actually, you do. Oh, you're right. And some SWO pulls me aside. It's like, you can't talk to the captain like that. I'm like, it's okay, we're good. But it's fun to have, that level of responsibility, develop that level of rapport with just, and you're saying there's two, maybe at most three, and everybody in the entire air wing knows who you are. Everybody on most of the ship knows who you are, because it's such a key and pivotal individual with all that. And it's not even just getting guys aboard safely. There's the rush chairman. You're leading the charge in port. I know, like, we had bongo bucks or whatever you call them, where it's like you can buy your way out of a bad landing with a $5 ticket.
You had a mulligan card, basically.
Mulligan. So, but I would take all that money. It's like, all right, air wing, we're going to be at this bar from this time to this time, and all that money we collected for those bongo bucks or whatever you call them, put it down on the bar, and you run an air wing party. You do skits for Forecastle Follies, where we've been out at sea for 3 months, okay, hey, this is quarter 1 is done. And now you're handing out awards, but there's skits and all that involved. And you're running that entire show. And, you're the MC, you're also the head comedian, you're giving roasts, you're getting roasted yourself. So you're running this whole thing, again, as just a senior lieutenant, junior lieutenant commander with everybody that knows exactly who you are. So it's not just that position on the LSO. It crosses so many paths with so many people, and it's just a fun position to have.
Wow. Yeah, it really is. That brings it all together, because I love that, again, that sense of humor and that camaraderie is all part of the culture of being an LSO. And you guys spend a lot of time on that in training and in the school with the mentoring of the newer LSOs, right? It's cultivating that culture.
Yep. It's kind of for love of the game, kind of thing, where this is not just a collateral duty. This is a passion. And to be good at it, you really have to care. And I can teach you the academics and the fundamentals, and I can teach you some of the techniques to hone for you. And some guys will get it and they'll graduate from being an LSO to becoming a paddles. Some guys will just be technically adequate LSOs their entire career and probably not progress, to those ag paddles, and maybe not even go on to wave students or things like that. But the guys who really kind of get it, and foster me there at the LSO school, where, I trained, I actually went through, before I retired, I trained over 1,000 LSOs from my time as a junior LSO there to 4 straight years as being an air wing landing SEAL officer. And then, at the LSO school, there was a lot of fun, a lot of different people that, I got to interact with. In fact, I was flying down here to Norfolk, from Norfolk down to Savannah, today to fly, for ATAC tomorrow. And I saw one of my old paddles in Norfolk. Hadn't seen the guy in like 6 years, bro hug in the airport. You just have these relationships that you kind of develop for life with the people that you've waved with. And that camaraderie that you develop on the platform, because you're out there in the cold, you're out there in the rain, you're smiling while you're doing it because you care.
Dude, and my air wing paddles is a pilot for my airline, and I run into him about once every year or 6 months, and when we see each other, it's just like it's like a high school reunion, man. It's like any other. It's like the greatest thing ever. I love the guy. He was an amazing mentor and pilot, and just a terrific guy. But all those CAC paddles that I worked for as a squadron LSO or whatever, it was awesome. I really look up to those guys. I still do. And when I was a student, the paddles that I had as a student going to the boat in the T2 was also a pilot for my airline. 2 of them. And when I see those guys, they remember me and I remember them. And it's the same thing, you're just so grateful that this guy stewarded you through your first carrier landings. I mean, it's hard. It's indescribable what you feel that you owe to somebody like that.
I mean, I remember going through the LSO school as a student, in 2000, after I got back from my first cruise, and Basher Blasham was one of the guys that came in and was teaching us, him, Flake Snow, and a couple others. I'm like, these are the guys that I want to be like. And this was so much fun, just the environment, the fraternity within the fraternity. I mean, the LSO community, there's only about 10% of all naval aviators that will ever be LSOs. And then only about 1% of that go on to be CAG LSOs. And, just some of the names that you could bring out through history from guys that from your time frame, through guys through CHIMPO's time frame, guys are commanding officers, carriers, et cetera, admirals and all that. There's just so many great individuals that are within that microcosm of the naval aviation community. And because we're all like-minded individuals, children to some degree, but
totally. There's very little maturity there. Yeah. Chris Blasham, Basher Blasham that you mentioned, he and I were winged together. We lost him in an F-14 accident, unfortunately, but he was one of the funniest people I ever knew in my life. I mean, he was really hilarious, and we laughed so much going through training together. We would just bring each other to tears. It was almost a contest to see which one of us could make each other laugh more. And when we went out to the ship to get our first carrier landings on the Lexington together, and actually he and I both disqualified in the T2. We both disqualified, and we had to do it all over again, both of us. So we had to go to the boat twice in the T2, and that was the most humiliating, torturous, terrible experience, thinking, oh, I didn't make it. Am I going to make it? Am I going to be a Navy pilot? And then we went back and we were successful, and then we went on to the A4 and did great and qualified and went on to fly F-14s, blah, blah, blah. But those times, those hard times that we went through together really made the good times even that much more. And he was a fantastic human being, and I couldn't imagine a better instructor to have at the LSO school to inspire people to want to.
Well, and I was fortunate to have known him individually. I'd walk into the O Club at Oceana, and he'd be holding court by himself. And then naturally, all the other LSOs would eventually join around him, and it would used to make for a long, fun night. But his legacy still carries on. So after his accident, they actually built a bar at the LSO school that they call Basher's Platform.
Awesome.
So, and it has his picture there and all that. So when the LSO school moved over to where it is now, which is the old A6 simulator building, it's got a great facility over there, state of the art. It's a really, really cool place. But the bar was in the government contract to relocate from the previous building to the new building. So as far as I know, it's the only government sanctioned bar to have been part of an official Navy move from one building to another. So Basher's Platform is still standing perfectly intact, just in another location. And his picture's still up there. And, and in fact, he's the background for every brief that starts at the LSO school. His picture is actually right there in the background for the screensaver.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. He's an amazing human being.
But that's a testament to guys like that in the community that have popped up all throughout of our careers. That it's just it's something that
Bug Roach. I mean, wouldn't be right if we had an LSO program and we didn't mention him. And he was also lost in an airplane accident in an A4. And everybody knows there's not a naval aviator that doesn't know who Bug Roach is. He's a famous LSO, and he's they still have a party with his name on it at Tailhook every year. It's just
it's Bug's picture and Basher's pictures are always there. And it's just one of those things. Admirals have come and gone, but there's always going to be guys like Bugs and Bashers and all that. And it's amazing to say those are guys that were part of our community. They were not going to be the guys that progressed on to the flag level, but damn it, did they leave a legacy that is just indelible in naval aviation? And that's something about the LSO community right there that says who we are.
Yeah, man, it's a club. That's cool. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and CHIMPO, why don't you walk us through a day as a CAG paddles at sea? What does that look like? How many recoveries? Who are you? What are your responsibilities? Training? Because it's a long day. I don't think people realize how hard you work out there in that job. It's brutal.
It is. But my waving days are my favorite days at sea, bar none. And the only thing better than a waving day was a waving day where you're putting your flight suit on, or if you're lucky enough to have like the turtleneck and the pants that a lot of LSO teams wear, just to kind of distinguish yourself. It's more of a flight deck uniform. But if you were having to brace yourself against the walls of your stateroom to get dressed because the boat was moving so much, those are going to be the best days. I miss them every day to this day. But in fact, I would be annoyed if one of my wave days landed on like a half day of flight ops or day only, where you're only getting like 40, 50 passes. But a lot of the busiest days on deployment, especially during OEF, OIF, I mean, you were 100 to 120 passes a day. You were out there to catch the cod, first thing, and then you weren't done until the last guy has landed about 1, 2 in the morning. Sometimes later, if a guy got held in country, and we would have prowlers that were out there in my first couple deployments that, they had tanked 5 times before they came back to the boat. Those guys had been in the plane for 10 hours. And it's like, you think you had a long day. That guy has been sitting in that chair for 10 hours. And now he's got to come down the chute and try to get aboard. And obviously you knew that before you went up there. So there was a special place in your heart for those guys. And you were damn sure going to get them aboard no matter what, with an okay pass, regardless of how it went, because of what they just went through to serve their country and then to come back home and try to get their whole crew back alive. So, I mean, I would wake up and a lot of times, to be honest, what I would do, and technique only, I guess. But if especially if it was a big pitching deck day, I would always put on like EDM, like electronic dance music, like something with like a good beat to it, just to kind of like get a rhythm in my head. Because when you got up there, you really had to feel what the ship was doing. You didn't really have time to look around and see which way the ship was moving. You had to feel it in your feet, and that went into what you said to the pilot so that he could accurately control his jet into the landing area. And it was the most fun I ever had. I mean, you wake up, get dressed, grab some food, check the weather, and then when I was CAG paddles, when I was a junior LSO, it wasn't uncommon to just have a couple guys go up and catch the cod because they were usually the first hit of the day. They'd land right after the first launch. I did away with that in CAG 5 because I was like, this is when our day starts. That plane can have just as many problems as a plane in the middle of a 20-plane recovery. The entire team will be up there, no matter what time in the morning it is, and that's how we're going to start our day. But it was great because it got everybody together a little bit earlier in the day than probably some guys were used to. But I was like, look, like we're a team. We're basically a family. You're away from your real family. Like this is it. And especially the way that we choose LSOs, your personality actually has a lot to do with it. And that's very much something that I learned from RJ in particular. Because as great as RJ is at teaching how to do the job, the mechanics like he was talking about, what RJ really taught me was how to love the job. And I read a book not too long ago called Unreasonable Hospitality, and it was basically about, if you love something with everything you have, you're going to be great at it. And more than anything, RJ taught me that it was not only mandatory to love the job, it was cool to love the job. It's a cool job. We're the guys that get to do it. And I would tell the guys, I was like, look, like, a bad day on the aircraft carrier is a great day for so many people that want to be here. A really bad day on the aircraft carrier is usually a tragedy. So it's a weird line that you walk, but when you learn from a guy like RJ, who I feel comfortable saying this, he's the modern day Bug Roach. There is not a pilot to this day, even the carriers that are out right now, there is not a pilot on an aircraft carrier right now in the Middle East and wherever they are that isn't in some way affected by RJ, because he taught the guys who are now doing the job right now. And his legacy carries on just like all those guys that you just mentioned. And it's like, I still want to be RJ to this day. And you take that when you go out there, you owe a debt of gratitude to guys like Bug and the F-14 pilot you were talking about. And I felt I owed a debt of gratitude to RJ, because I'm like, look, he's the one that sent me out here. I owe him everything. He taught me how to be like this. It's incumbent upon me to do that every day. And I loved it. It was an honor to do it. And it just turns into this thing where it's your wave days for me were my favorite days. And I love to fly the plane, but and maybe not everybody agrees. I'd rather be on the LSO platform than even in the cockpit, just because of the weight that you carry. You feel like you're doing something every single pass. There's plenty of flights you go up. Maybe it's a training hop, even if you're on deployment. You don't necessarily do all that much, but if you're on the LSO platform, you're always doing something, no matter what, that matters. And this the fulfillment, the satisfaction that you get out of that. To me, there's nothing. I'm not sure there's anything that's ever going to top that. To be honest, when I retire, I want to be a firefighter, because I think that's the only place where you could get the camaraderie, of a firehouse that I felt on the LSO platform and with those guys when you're debriefing and you come down to debrief that recovery and guys are soaking wet. And you just see guys are wide-eyed because it was so dark and guys aren't breaking out until a couple 100 feet. And all you had was a taxi light to wave guys and the boat's moving. You're still rocking around. And to sit down there with a team of 7 or 8 guys, especially as CAG paddles, when they're your guys, there's nothing I think that can really top that. And it's kind of back to what we were saying earlier. The ability to laugh with these guys is so important. When I was a RAG instructor, I always preached to the other instructors, especially when I was a senior guy, everybody flies better happy. Like, don't be a dick in the plane. This job is hard enough. And I took that to the platform. I'm like, don't be a dick on the platform. This job is scary. Like, it's scary. Nobody will admit it. But when you stare down the back end of the ship that you can barely see at night, it's moving. Lineup is dancing all over the place. You're flying straight, but the boat is like, I'm not. It's scary. And you have to have a tone of voice on the radio that lets those guys know they're safe. They're going to get home. Just fly the plane. I swear to God, I'll get you home. And one of my favorite memories in my entire career, I've been in 18 and a half years. I got to fly off of the rig and to Australia, all the way to Pensacola. RJ was the LSO OIC at the time, and he was running the LSO OAG, which is the conference we have. I think it's every other year, where you just kind of get all of the LSOs that can make it together and go over new tactics, trends. Hey, what have we learned in the last 2 years? And we had a big night out. I think we ended up at Floribama and then at Waffle House, and RJ was kind enough to ferry guys back and forth. And he walks into Waffle House, and I'm pounding waffles and True Moo chocolate milk. I was in one, and I was super jet lagged, properly inebriated. And on the way home, there was a van of like 7 LSOs, RJ driving, and I was sitting shotgun and just went on this diatribe of I don't even remember what I was saying, but I got RJ laughing so hard that he had to pull the van over. Had to pull the van over because he was crying from laughing so hard. And to me, it was just so cool, because it was like, you can have these moments with these guys who have the most deadly serious job in the entire world, but then you can also have a moment like that. So to be able to blow off steam and just be like, wow, like, we've literally saved people's lives. We're going right back to the boat to save more people's lives, get them home to their families. But then we can also joke around like this. It means the world. And I would take that every single day that I was waving. I would take that to the platform and try my hardest to teach the guys on my teams that mentality, because I can teach you how to give a guy a power call. I can't teach you how to love the job, but I can show you how to do it. And that's what RJ showed all of us. And to the point, one of my most fond memories of being deployed, it was 2016, South China Sea in November. We were running from a typhoon. The boat was moving all over the place, like literally having to brace yourself against the walls of your stateroom to get dressed. And we had alerts set, but we hadn't launched anybody yet. And so I get to CAG Ops early, the office that we have below the flight deck on the Ronald Reagan. And CAG and the captain both come in, and they knew I was waving that day. And just like RJ said, you build a rapport with the captain. I was just a lieutenant at the time, and you're just some random lieutenant who has the weight of the world on your shoulders. And rightfully so. And captain of the Reagan said to me, I was like, hey, like, what do you think? And one of the things I learned from RJ is that the ability to speak truth to power. And I said to him, I was like, gentlemen, you launch him, I'll catch him. I swear, like, if we got to go to work today, everybody's coming home. And they both looked at each other. Captain goes, okay. And he walks out. And then like literally less than a minute later, he must have still been walking. I hear the radio that the guys all used to talk to each other on the ship. And I just hear, we'll go for flight ops. And within 2 minutes later, you hear the jets start to spool up. And I was like, I'm just like some random lieutenant. And yet they wanted to have that conversation with me. I gave them the answer that they needed. And all of a sudden I hear multi-million-dollar aircraft firing their engines up so that they could go launch, do their jobs, knowing full well that everybody was going to come home at the end of the night. And so to me, that's the dichotomy about this job that I love so much, where I can get RJ laughing so hard that he has to pull over a minivan in Pensacola at 2 a.m. But then you go back out to sea and it's game on as hard as it can possibly be. And that to me is a day on the platform. And I took that mentality to heart, and I took it up to the platform every single time. And I get pumped up talking about it now. That was years ago. But it's the best job you can have in the world.
What I was getting at, though, too, is that you guys, you start in the morning and who knows what's going on. You might have an S3 or you might have an E2 running out there to do some sort of recon BS. They decided to just send a solo out, or you got a COD coming aboard. Who knows? And then you got to catch that guy
in the future.
Right, or drones. Who knows what it is, right? And then you've got, let's say how many cycles. You might have 10 cycles. In my day, they were an hour and 40-minute cycles, sometimes 2-hour cycles. So that alone, if you have 10 of those, you're looking at, an 18-hour day, right?
Oh, they're super
you're
long
up there
days.
every 2 hours, every hour and a half to 2 hours, recovering 10 to 15 airplanes, maybe 20, depending on how big of a strike package or whatever the heck's going on. And you got to get those aboard. And my impressions are like, I can remember this. Okay, it's time for you hear the airplane start going down the catapult, right? So it's like, okay, they're launching. Let's get up there.
Time to go.
And you start going up, and the CAG paddles would say, hey, guys, okay, you're going to wave this recovery, and you're going to get the next one, and I want you to write, or whatever. He's mentoring his guys. And then, you're on the pickle, and you're watching those last couple guys go up the cat while you're watching the dudes overhead circling, and you're going, okay, they should be setting up for the break here now, because I see the last 2 airplanes get into the catapults. And then you see them starting to pick up some smack and lower in, and then they come right up the fantail hauling ass. And right as that last guy launches, they're into the break. And you see those guys trying to button down all that cat track and, make sure their resting gears are in battery and all that stuff. And it's foul deck, foul deck, foul deck. And then all of a sudden that guy's rolling through the 45 and you hear clear deck. And now your pickle's up and you're, giving this guy the cut lights and, he's aboard before you know it. And you got to spit that pass out to the rider. It happens quickly and it's a lot of stress. And you do that over a 14 or 18-hour day. And then you got to enter all that crap in. You got to go around and debrief all those guys. Every one of those landings, you stand in front of each individual pilot and give them a breakdown of what you saw. And some of them give you the weirdest looks, like that ain't what happened. And other ones,
I had a Marine commanding officer choke me.
Choke you? I can remember a commanding officer throwing his helmet across the room. The childish behavior.
It was the best, and it was worth it because you get those reactions every now and then. But and it was funny too because I always made a point of, if it was my wave day, especially as CAG paddles, I was in the CAG ops office before the first launch of the day, because I was like, if that guy has a problem off the catapult shot, like we're emergency pull forward, clearing the deck as hard as possible. I had one of my buddies who's CAG paddles out there kind of got burned by that. He was in the shower when the first launch went off. He's like, oh, I got time. And the first guy off had a problem. And they're like paddles to the platform. And he literally hears that as he's like shampooing his hair. And he's like, oh no. So we ended up having to cover for him. And I was like, look, man, and he was new at the time. I'm like, I'm telling you, be in the office for that first cat shot because you never know when you're going to get burned by that again. Right. But then, it's 14-hour days if it's a full day, and I especially as CAG paddles, I remember after the last walkthrough, and again, and I still want to be a firefighter. So to me, it always reminded me at the end of the day, because you're covered in sweat and soot and jet fuel and hide fluid and
you always have all that
gas.
Grit in your hair, and your skin's all covered in
you're
soot.
Gross, but it always just reminded me of like the pictures you see of like firefighters that they came out of a burning building and just put it out and they get the smoke and they're just covered in it, and that's how I felt. And after the last walkthrough at the end of the night, at midnight or whatever, I'd come back through to go back in the CAG office to enter all the stuff for the day. But I would cut through the Admiral's area, the blue tile area with the curtains that they would have. And I would just put my hands on my knees. I'd still have my headset around the back of my neck and just gross, but I would just put my hands on my knees. I'd just be like, thank God we got through another one. And I'm not even a religious guy, but like sometimes you just got to lean on something. And I was at the end of every single wave that I ever had, I would just take a half second to myself in the blue tile area and just be like, thank God that we got everybody back today. Because you never know when things are going to get weird.
34,000 feet or 3/4 mile behind the ship.
Exactly. But I loved it because it's, and the chaos, controlled chaos is a little cliche, but it's what it is. And it's, we sit here talking about how awesome it is to be an LSO, but those flight deck crews, those kids are working even longer than we are to set the deck up and shut the deck down. There's no day and night shift for those guys. It's one crew on the flight deck. They're working even harder than we are to get everything ready to go. They're the unsung heroes. Yeah. And to get up there and see them work, and then you see your team get up there, and especially first thing in the day, everybody's fresh and ready to go, and then you see the team at the end of the night just covered in jet fuel and hide fluid and whatever rain and everything else we got. And she's like, "Hey boys, we went to battle today and we came out unscathed. Like that's a good day." And I would sleep like a rock those nights just because you knew you did something that mattered, and even if there wasn't a whole lot going on that day in the air, there's always something going on 3/4 mile behind the ship, no matter what. It doesn't change. You can shoot down every bogey that you ever came across. You still got to get aboard. And so to be there and to be the guy that they relied on, it meant the world to me.
And it's amazing how things change every 45 to 60 seconds for all those hours straight. You can go from screaming bloody murder, power, wave off, oh my God, you're about to die. And then 45 seconds later, the next guy's rolling around the corner, Roger ball, and everything's all good again, because you have to be that way for the next day. And you're doing this for 6 straight hours, during carrier qualification. For students, as a senior LSO for like airline, air pack, you can't leave the platform. You have to be up there for every student landing. And we don't take helo breaks anymore, because now the helos can land over on one of the elevators.
Spot 7,
worst thing that's ever happened to LSOs. Because now we can't leave the platform, and you got to go pee off the catwalk down below the LSO escape chute. But you're you're on your game all day long, every 45 to 60 seconds. And it's just, it is exhausting, but it's also so rewarding. And you're not doing it for validation, but there are no two greater words that any LSO can ever hear other than thanks paddles. You know, after you've given that guy that talk down in bad weather, pitching deck, you know, you're doing that because that's your bud and this is what you care about the most. But we're not doing this for ourselves, but that those two words, thanks paddles, you know, it's just like, okay, that's meaningful to hear that.
Yeah, the rush that you get, especially if you're on primary, like you're literally you're watching a guy coming through the 90 as you're leaning back, and the YouTube channel can see it. But I mean, you got the pickle in the air, you've got your phone up, and you're literally looking back to the guy writing the grade down, calling the pass out as you're watching a guy come through the 90 as he's getting to the 45. The guy that's on backup with his head in LSODs will look over his left shoulder and be like, "Hey, I gave him a come left in the middle." And so that guy's writing that down. And then Cag Paddle's like, "Hey, I gave him a little power in the middle and an easy with it at the ramp." And all of that is happening as a guy is coming onto the ball. And the adrenaline you get from that is a guy's coming through the 90. This dude is still taxiing out of the LA. He's not even clear yet. Deck's foul. Your head's over your hand. And then his buddy's coming on downwind as two more guys are coming in for the break. We're the guys that get to do that. And I just felt like it was imperative that, like, the way that we treated that job was we were the lucky ones. And obviously, you know, you earn that position real hard, but at the same time, we're the ones that get to do it. And so many people want to be there. And so to just experience that rush of adrenaline, and then to be able to give it back to the pilots, just like RJ said, I mean, the thank you paddles. We had a guy, I remember it was the night before a port call. We were pulling into Hong Kong, and we had just picked up a brand new nugget. Kid's name was Sam Delaney. His call sign's Pom Pom, and he came aboard, just gotten out there with us in Japan. Flew a grade pass, basically full high the whole way down, worked it down nice and smooth into the 2-wire. The Reagan's a 3-wire boat, so the 2-wire is the target wire out there. And what would have been a fair pass, great pass, but just a fair pass, full high all the way down, just basically a high come down all the way into the 2-wire. And we get down below into the little debrief room that we have. And so we go through all the passes for that recovery. And we were only doing day offs because the ship was going to basically head in and anchor overnight. And then we were taking Liberty launches or whatever. And the guys called it a fair pass, as they should have. And you always, in the debrief, whoever was on primary reads all of the grades, and he reads what he called for each individual pass and then the grade. And guys can chime in, and sometimes there's some debate about what certain people saw, and if there's any disagreements, we hash them out then, because everybody's on the same page when you walk out of that debrief room. It has to be that way, because you don't want any back and forth. Everybody's got to be on the same page. And so I sat there as Cag Paddles and listened to the debrief, and so everybody called this kid's pass a fair pass and moved on. And I said to him, I was like, "Listen, what do we think about Delaney's pass there?" And everybody kind of looked at me, and you know, the consensus was that he was full high and worked it down real smooth. And I was like, "I do agree with that. It's the right call technically, but who cares about grades? We care about good habits." He made very, very safe corrections. I would say above average corrections for a nugget to be full high and to work it down as safely and as energized as he did. He didn't scare us, because you can have a new kid, or you can have anybody in that position that tries to come down too fast, and that's how you turn into a fireball. And so I said to him, I was like, "Look, guys, we go into port tomorrow. We've got Cag Paddles party night 1, and Long Koi Fong, LKF. I had already set the party up with the Bongo Buck money that RJ spoke of earlier. It's going to be a great first night." And I was like, "Look, we can read this kid a fair pass. He's probably going to be happy with it. Or we can say, hey, we absolutely love what you did there. You made all the right corrections. You got to the high start, just like we basically wanted for a new guy, because don't scare us with a low, but you made all the right corrections. We read this kid an okay pass before he pulls into port. Tomorrow he's in port. He calls his parents, says, hey, I'm doing great. You just set that kid up for the next who knows how long." And that's something I learned from RJ, is that you have to instill in these guys early. If you don't want somebody to explode on the back of your deck, you got to teach them the right way. Who cares about grades? Thank you for doing what you did the way that you did it. And so we go through in the debrief, and we read this kid an okay pass, little high come down all the way. And this kid was ecstatic. He started hugging the guys on the team, and he's a brand new guy. Like, he didn't even know he was supposed to do that. But I was like, that was so much more effective than if we just read him the fair pass that he basically flew. And that's, I think, when RJ talks about the art of that job, I think that's kind of where that comes in. And that's what I was hellbound on trying to teach these guys is like, look, there's so much more than the grades and just getting people into the wires. You can set people up for a very long time to get so much satisfaction and joy out of this job if you just do it right. And I'll never forget that kid's reaction. He was a brand new nugget, and that'll stick with me for the rest of my career, rest of my life, because I feel like there's a lot of life lessons in that. And that just speaks to a lot of all of the things that RJ taught us, and I'll always be grateful for that.
I think that part of the culture of hiring, I don't want to get all squishy and stuff, but it really is a job for somebody that has kind of a higher EQ, that can kind of read the other guys. I mean, get in their heads and understand their, what's making them tick and how they fly. And, especially when you're training students how to land on the ship for the first time or at the RAG or whatever, because I mean, the stress levels as a student, in the F-14 RAG, when I went through the F-14 RAG, we had a 25% failure rate at the carrier. And we had plenty of guys that went twice and didn't make it and ended up, lost their job, and rightfully so, because we had one guy who had 2 disquals. And I mean, it's very expensive to work a guy up to go to the ship. It's it's almost a month-long process, and you got the whole carrier thing out there. So for the RAG to invest in somebody to go 3 times is unheard of. And they had this guy who was just a rock star. He had the highest grade, he's Commodore list, all this kind of, Hall of Fame grade type guy, and a great guy and a super guy with a good attitude. But he did everything great except land on the ship, and he had a third try at the boat, and they passed him. So they said, okay, go out to the fleet. And everyone was kind of like, phew. Well, he goes out of the fleet, and 2 months later, he has a ramp strike. Mm-hmm. And it was like, that was somebody needed to make the hard decision and say, look, this guy's a good pilot, but he just has trouble landing on the ship, so he needs to do something else. And they didn't make that call, and they ended up, trashing an airplane. I think the guy survived, actually. But it was one of those kind of things, where you're going. So as a student going through the RAG, as an F-14 student, I remember that, those are your first night carrier landings. And the F-14A was a very challenging airplane to fly, and the night carrier landings were pretty scary stuff, the first few. And the LSOs that I had were great. So, I mean, you were like, that was your lifeline, right?
Right.
So here you are on the other side of that equation. I think it's important that when you're hiring somebody to do that job, as you did, RJ, you hired many guys and you trained many of these guys, that you're kind of fostering that skill set of being able to get inside the student's head. Is that true, or am I off base here?
True. And as I taught, because there's, as you mentioned, at the LSO school, there's various levels of qualifications and classes you do. So you start out with initial formal ground training, which is, hey, you're a squadron pilot. You've been nominated to be an LSO. You're going to go to get the basic 2-week course at the LSO school to teach you the fundamentals, and then you get most of the rest for on-job training. Then if you progress and you're going to become an instructor at the RAG or in the training command, you go through a couple-day training class. And then if you're going to be at CAG paddles, you go on through an advanced class. And, CHIMPO will know, one of the things I said particularly the training class and the CAG paddles classes, in this job, you're part psychiatrist, because you've got to be able to get into that pilot's head and understand what he's doing. You need to know every single pilot. And you've got 100 pilots in your air wing, but every one of them. You know their tics. You know what they tend to do. You know their personality nuances. You're also part class clown, because you've got to be the one leading the charge for the entire air wing.
Or lighten the mood during stressful times.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're part philosopher. So you're imparting some of your nuggets of wisdom to all the younger guys on the platform, and they're soaking that up from you. So it's a delicate balancing act. If you want to call it the EQ side, you absolutely have to do that, because it's not just the technical aspects. We can teach you the technical aspects of being an LSO, but all the rest of that stuff is part of the paddle side. And that's what you try to groom in guys. And, CHIMPO will say the same thing, but you have guys that get nominated to be an LSO by their commanding officer. Maybe it's just their timing. Maybe they're overall technically good at landing aboard the ship, but whatever else. But they come up there and they grasp the fundamentals and they can be technically adequate, but they're the guys that they're monotone on the radio. They're kind of lackluster and noticing all the subtle nuances of every single pass, which you're not just grading, how a guy's deviations are, left, right, high, low. You're also figuring out how he got there. So we can teach a guy as part of the philosopher side and the instructor side of how did you make those deviations? How can we fix this next time? You're part doctor and diagnosing whatever the underlying, malady is that's causing a guy that's struggling behind the ship. And that's how you kind of break through to the guys. And some of those guys will just never get it. And they're the ones that, and I've had several, you look at them, I'm going to give you this level of qualification, but you're not going to progress to what we call wing qualification, where you can wave every aircraft, on board the ship technically by yourself. I'm just not going to grant you that qual because I don't want you to go on and instruct students because you just don't have that it factor. All those other things that are so intangible, but are so integral into being a good paddles. And that's kind of the innate side of it. You can get and learn some of that, but that's more the individual side, which is why it's important to, you're the guy that I want. And it's also, it helps that a lot of guys are drawn to that community. There's already kind of that nugget of them in there. And that's why they want to say, I want to be an LSO. And that's part of who they are. And then I can foster and nurture all that because I can see that diamond in the rough. Like, yep, you're going to be a great, all right, I'm going to take this guy under the wing. And they rapidly progress. It's like, you're the guy that me as a kite paddles, I trust you. I'm going to go downstairs and grab a cheeseburger. You got this one. And I've done that a couple times because I want that kid to, now he's got that qualification. I want him to be able to go on and get his next, level of qual. And there's nothing greater than, holy crap, RJ trusts me enough to leave the platform and let me run it.
Yeah.
Granted, I wouldn't really go all the way down to grab a cheeseburger. I'd be like right downstairs. Just
yeah.
But I mean, it's a huge thing for guys like that. Like, the training wheels
gigantic.
Are off.
Of course it is.
That was a huge badge of honor. And it was, I mean, I can't speak enough about RJ. I know he's right here, but he just taught you how to wear all the different hats that you needed to make it all the way to the top of this job. I mean, you're a therapist, you're a morale police, you're all of these different things. And I gravitated towards it because I'm way too extroverted.
Don't forget diplomat.
Yeah, that's the thing. And sometimes you got to be, the tough love guy. But I just gravitated to the job because I was just way too extroverted.
But generally, the perception of the people that are outside the community is that, military pilots are arrogant and they're confident. You see the movies, they're bullies. They're kind of, I'm the best or whatever. And I would say that, the LSO culture is almost the antithesis of that, where we are completely, you're looking for the good guy, the big brother, the dude you can laugh with, the guy you can drink with, the guy you can cry on his shoulder when things are bad, the dude you ask for advice very discreetly that you trust. I mean, that was what the community is not, I mean, and you have to be positive. Like, you have to have a positive attitude, none of this, oh, I hate being at sea. I miss my wife. Yeah, we all miss our wives, but hey, man, look,
you can't wave angry.
Yeah, it's cool. Look at this. Holy cow. Oh my God, look at that guy. There's no way he's going to make it. Oh, he's going to make it.
You can't wave angry and you can't wave scared. And it's,
and there are guys that do and have, and they're not going to excel, but that's the corner cases. And most of it's exactly what you're talking about, LEEKSTER. It's the guys that are exactly like that. Like, all right, I can be your therapist, like CHIMPO saying, I can be, your best friend, leading the charge. Yeah, I was the kid that got shoved in the locker, all through high school. But I eventually grew into my own, a little bit more. So and I'm still, as a 52-year-old, still flying fighter jets. So I love, this whole community. And this is all I've ever known and all I've ever cared about, and refused to grow up. And if I can't wave out on carriers anymore, I at least can still keep flying fighter jets, in my second career. But it's just such a passionate job for those who really care about it because of all those things. And that's why it fosters the right people. It fosters the right spirit. And like you said, it's kind of the antithesis of the arrogance, because you're not doing that for yourself. You're doing it for that guy that's out there at 3/4 of a mile that you're getting aboard. It has nothing to do with you. This is all about him and making sure that outcome for him is going to be the best possible thing. You're there as the last line of defense, and you're there as the first person to reach out if he needs help. And it's not about us. So it is exactly like you're saying, kind of the antithesis of that arrogant side. You have to be confident.
So I was just about to say, so it's kind of a learned presentation of how you carry yourself, because cocky doesn't work, but confidence has to be there, because you're not going to trust a guy that's not confident. But one of the things that we always learn from RJ is that it's not what you say, but how you say it on the radio that's going to get the desired response. Because you could be in the best mood in the world, but if the guy calls the ball 3/4 of a mile at night while it's raining on a dark night, and you're like, Roger ball, like, the guy's going to tense up no matter what. Like, you're not going to fly your best pass if that's what you hear on the radio. But if you change your inflection a little bit, and all of a sudden, like, oh, cool, like, Chimpo's got me, like, oh, RJ's got me, like, I'm going to get in, like, we're good. It's just I don't know what it does to, like, your mental psyche is so huge. And it's hard to adequately describe unless you've really done it. But the way that you speak on the radio matters so much more than what you actually say on the radio, because you're already operating on stem power. So the inflection that you get on the radio is going to dictate how you react more than the words that are actually spoken. And it takes a little while to learn that, but once you get it and once you get good at it, it's so satisfying to see the desired reaction of a naval aviator controlling his aircraft in the manner with which you asked. And then he lands on an aircraft carrier that's chugging through the North Arabian Sea at 30 knots. The satisfaction you get out of that, knowing that you had nothing to do with it other than say a couple of words on the radio. And as a kid that wanted to fly these planes since I was 2 years old, all of a sudden I just said some stuff to this guy, and now his $150 million jet just whizzed past me at 150 knots into the target wire. I don't know. To me, it's the best feeling in the world. I absolutely love it.
Very, very satisfying. So one last question. RJ, can you describe how does the bottle bet work? How did you guys do that at the RAG? Or how did we? Most people don't know, but there was a bottle bet between the LSOs and the students, and I'm sure you can describe it far better than I can.
Yeah. The idea is there's a certain number of bets. So you would bet on grade point average, you would bet on target wires, you would bet on a couple different things. And each one of those bets would, if the student won it, the LSO would give that student a bottle of their choice, and if the bet went in the favor of the LSO, it would be vice versa. The intent is not to gamble with students, and it's not to make students buy you a bunch of booze. The idea is, one, I'm fostering a little bit of a sense of competition with those guys. I want them to go out there, and I want them to think that as a student, they can crush it. It's like, you know what? I'm going to take that bet and I'm going to win every single one of them. And I want them to do that because I want that level of confidence from them. But then I also want them to go out there and lose some of those bets, not for my own sake so I can get those bottles of booze, but so that they can see I'm not quite as good as I thought I was. And there's that humbling effect that comes from, okay, I barely got through on this. And, when you're the best grade you can get is okay, and you're coming out with, 3.0 GPA from, getting your carrier qualification, and you've lost all your bets, and you hand them to your LSO, which that LSO, by the way, gave up nearly a month's worth of flying, being down there, sitting at the end of the runway, doing all your practice carrier landings, being out there at the back of the ship for 6 straight hours, waving you aboard when you're scaring the hell out of them because you're so unpredictable. You know what? That instructor probably deserves those bottles. So, and at the end, there's meant to be a carrier qualification party that, hey, everybody gets together, the bets are settled, and then, the bottles get opened up and it's a big party. And then, if there's excess, okay, hey, that bet, went to the, this LSO, and they get their liquor locker, and they, they're barred home. They, they pad with all the spoils of victory from all that. So that was kind of the the idea of, behind it. It kind of morphed over time with some guys like, no, this is, I want my own booze. And, it kind of changed to some of that for a perception, which actually resulted into a inspector general complaint into the LSO community that effectively ended the bottle bet practice. So it was kind of couched as LSOs would be changing grades to win it for themselves. So they would powder liquor locker and things like that, which never, ever, ever happened.
I never saw that happen a single time.
But that's what the complaint said. So, it takes one rotten apple to kind of spoil the entire process.
Right.
I do believe that it's back going on, in the right guys under the tables. I couldn't say one way or another. But the spirit and intent behind it was to foster that sense of competition, to let a student go out there and think he's going to crush it, and then get humbled a little bit because you're not quite as good as you think you are, and you still have something to learn. And then I
thought it was fantastic, man. I loved it as a student. Every time I got to bet against my instructor and say, hey, and you go into it as a student going, I'm probably going to lose, but so what? This guy, the way I looked at it was kind of a tax. This guy gave me a gift. He's teaching me how to land on an aircraft carrier. He's putting a lot. I mean, you watch how much effort an LSO puts into really caring about their students and getting them to safely land on aircraft carriers. And so what?
Debriefing.
I lost the bet. I had to buy a bottle of scotch for a guy.
It's all in good fun.
I'm very happy to give it to him when I complete my training. It was great. I love it.
That's how I felt. It was a rite of passage, but it also meant that you just carrier qualified. Like you just successfully completed qualifications on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. There's only 10 of those in the entire world, and you are qualified to land on them. And I remember the bets that I lost, whatever I owed, I went out and found the biggest bottles of whatever brand those LSOs wanted. And in the Hawkeye, you pay for, you always get the guy that rode in your back seat. The NFO, because we'd always have an NFO in the back.
Oh yeah,
you get them
Fire
one too,
watch.
And it's like honestly, maybe they deserve one more than anybody because they
do, man. Because I've been back there. It's scary.
Yeah, it sucks. But I went out and all of my bets, I bought the biggest bottles because I was like, this is awesome. Like I am so happy that I qualified and that you guys got me there. And whatever the biggest bottle of the brands that you want, that's what I bought. I spent a couple $100 on my bets, and I loved every second of it.
Yeah, that I think it was a great tradition.
So I'm hoping that tradition's still alive.
Although, I think it probably is. I have a good feeling that it's coming back quite well. I think that naval aviation culture is alive and well in the United States, and I think you can see that if you go to Tailhook. Everybody's is fully invested in it still, from what I can tell.
The guy who's currently running the LSO school is, he's another passion, project kind of guy. He's cut from the same cloth as CHIMPO and I. Loves this community, loves this profession, and the last couple of guys are like that too. So it's good and alive, which warms my heart. Even despite all the technical advances, the soul of the LSO is still intact.
Well, I think this is going to wrap it up unless you guys have some spectacular stories of there I was that you were dying to share, because maybe there's I know you have tons of them, but
I got it. Yeah. The craziest thing I ever saw was during OEF. I was waving and my roommate comes down and traps on the 3-wire, and I get the non-skid facial, so I'm kind of turning away, and it's right on the dark side of Pinky, so it's just it's getting dark. And then something doesn't sound right, and I turn around, and he's not stopping anymore. And he's continuing to go, and now I start screaming eject, eject on the radio, which all I hear is side tone, because the hierarchy, the air boss, the captain, everybody can override. But basically, I look at them disappear off the end of the angle deck, and then time compression kind of sets in. I'm like, well, they're dead. And the next thing you see is 2 rocket seats coming up from below deck level. I'm like, well, that's good. Then you see 2 parachutes open. Well, that's also good. Then you see this pilotless F-14A in full afterburner appear from below the deck and now start going vertical and silhouetting, the parachutes are right in front of them. I'm like, well, that's not good. So they come down, they land just next to the angle deck. And I'm at the platform, so I run over to the port side, and I can see them bobbing in the wake next to the ship, looking up. And then I look up, and now this F-14A is stalled out, inverted directly above the landing area. I'm like, well, that's really not good. And I know there's 4 bombs still loaded on it because he didn't drop anything in country. So seemingly, I'm like, wait for it. I'm like, all right, get below. I'm like, is it going to hit left? Is it going to hit right? It's going to hit left. So I start running across the landing area, sprinting across. This thing comes in long darts right next to the smoking sponson. Guys down there were out there having a cigarette and just got splashed by this F-14A, just going pure vertical and full afterburner right down. So, and then right then, there's another jet at the start. So I run back over to the platform, wave off, foul deck.
Yeah.
So, right after I've just witnessed an ejection and screamed eject on the radio. Long story short, he trapped in the 3-wire, and it was the first trap on that tailhook, but it was metal embrittlement because it was a unauthorized procedure at NADEP North Island where they're using sodium ions to buff it, and it just caused it to break like a piece of chalk. So we go out in the landing area, the 3-wire is intact, and there's half of the Tomcat tailhook just sitting on the 3-wire. And it's like, well, all right, let's get this out of the way and get back to catching aircraft.
Yeah, save that for my bar.
Yeah. So, but
wow.
That was the craziest thing I ever saw.
Yeah,
plenty of other passes that were pretty wild, but that's hands down the craziest thing I've seen from the platform.
Yeah, I saw an ejection from the platform as well, and we had more than one actually. They were all A6s though, so nobody missed them.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I can only laugh about it because everybody survived all these ejections, but those airplanes, they had a rough go of it.
No, they were. No, I lost the Tomcat for my squadron each one of my first cruises. Yeah, everybody got out. Fun story, but my first cruise, it was each one of them was one of my roommates, but my roommate, the first cruise that punched out, the only male Tomcat pilot I know to have ejected with painted toenails, which might be another sidebar for another story.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So he might have gotten ugly a little early in the admin that we just pulled out of port. And I might have painted his toenails with some of the female Rios that we had in my squadron. He did not want to remove the toenail polish to basically say that we'd won. So when he gets down to medical and they're pulling off his boots and then he's got these bright red painted toenails, he's like, I'll explain later.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's like it was him. I'm like, what?
Well, Chimbo, you got any more you want to?
Nothing that tops that. The one that comes to mind though here and that I had just finished my CAG 5 paddles tour. It was almost the end of November 2018. I'd already had my float coat taken apart, and I was taking it home with me, and I had my hail and bail. I was out of there, and I was at the ARO shack on the aircraft carrier where all like the passengers that get on the cod to fly off the ship hang out at.
Sure.
And so I'm just sitting there. The cod had already landed, and I was basically waiting for them to just start loading everybody up and everything. And it was taking a while, and I was surprised because I didn't go down there till like the last minute because I didn't feel like hanging out in there. I was just hanging out in CAG Ops with all the guys. In fact, I actually had a fish that I kept on board for 2 years. And so it was just fun to like hang out with the guys for like one last hurrah, and I head out to the ARO shack, and I'm waiting to go up at the cod I already say goodbye to these guys. Who knows when I'm going to see them again. And there were no comms that come into the ARO shack, but one of the guys in there had a brick, the radio I was talking about earlier. And there was some weird stuff going out over it that I was like kind of hearing, kind of not. And then on the plat cam that shows the flight deck, a helicopter comes in on a spot one, like the far forward part of the flight deck, which is not where they usually land. And they were getting gas real quick. And I was like, something's weird. And I was like, all right, like we're not loading up yet. Let me go back to CAG Ops real quick. And I go back in, and there's a flurry of activity. And the guy that had replaced me had come running in a float coat. And he kind of looks around and he sees me. He's like, Chimpo, guy just punched out. It was a 2-seater. Deck shut down. We had 20 guys overhead. Like, can you come up here and help me out with this? Like, he was like brand new to CAG battles. And he was like, these guys are getting low on gas. Like, I just don't want to screw anything up. Like, I got to catch these guys. And I was like, guess I'm not leaving yet. And so I grabbed like some random float coat that was way too tight, mostly because of the biceps, even though they don't have sleeves, but I'm a big dude. So whatever. So I go running up to the flight deck thinking that like my CAG paddles career was done. And they had some kind of hydraulic issue and punched out right before the jet went inverted and splashed into the water. So the helicopter was trying to pull these guys out. And so I watched these guys get lifted in, and the helicopter gets out of the way, and these dudes are getting low on gas. So they clear the flight deck as fast as they could. And I end up on primary in some like super tight float coat and like caught the remainder of that 20 plane daytime recovery. And we get everybody aboard, no problem. And then I hear the air boss on the 5MC, the big microphone that goes out over the flight deck. He's like, all right, we got everybody. Everybody's good. The guys survived. They're fine. And he's like, get the cot off the deck. And I was like, whoa, that's my ride home to America. Like I had to fly back to Japan to catch a flight back to. Yeah, I'm trying to get home for Thanksgiving, man. Like,
hey, they got my underwear on that.
I was like, yeah, they literally did. They had my bags, like everything I had on the ship. They had in sea bags that were going to the. I was like, oh, I gotta go. So I was like, Dangle, you got it. Nice work. I gotta get out of here. So we like hug it out like on the platform. After I thought my waving days were behind me, I run down, sprint into CAG ops to like dump this float coat, and there are the two COD pilots just like sitting there, and I'm like, are we not going? And they're like, no, waiting to figure out what's going on. I was like, everybody's on deck. The air boss just said to get your plane off the deck, and they're like, oh, damn it. So they go flying up. I go flying in right behind them, get the window seat on the COD, which there's only two. And they had that thing fired up in about 8 minutes, and we were off the deck. And that's how I ended my CAG paddles career. And they flew us back to Tokyo, and I spent a day checking out and made it home in time for Thanksgiving. But that was the culmination of my my CAG paddles career. I got one more recovery and that I was not expecting. And thank God the guys got out just fine. But it was a strange turn of events that I was in no way planning on.
Wow. Timing is everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think this was a very, very interesting and successful show. What do you think, Lorenzo?
Absolutely amazing. I mean, I like to say a lot that, we go to school on a lot of these shows. We learn a lot. There's a lot of data. It's deep. It's not just, there I was in the spotlight punching the afterburner. And that is, you guys really get into the detail of it. And literally did go to school tonight. We went to LSO school. So that was awesome, man. You guys absolutely amazing. And before I defend Grumman in a second with the F-14A, I just want to say, you guys all know a fly-in, the homecoming, the families are waiting by the hangar, and when the last jet gets secured to the deck and the canopy comes open, and they'll release the families to come see the air wing and whatnot. And after 6 months of a cruise, it's a big moment for you guys. I'm sure nobody in those families thinks of it in that moment to thank the LSOs because their family, when you guys are waving it, it's like you said, it's an emotional, it's a connected experience to the guy coming down the pipeline to the deck. And it's, he's got a family, and you see that with your own eyes, and you have your own families. And so it's a very sweet spot in naval aviation, LSO, the career. It's very honorable, place to be on deck, honestly.
I think the thank you is when you see the pictures of guys in the air wing hugging their families, because there's plenty of times you go up to the flight deck and it's super dark and you just lean on the LSOD, the display system, and you think to yourself, everybody gets home tonight. And then when you actually see it happen, that's the thank you. Nobody needs to say thank you. RJ would be the first to tell you that. But
no, RJ is right, and that is the thing about being an LSO too, is because you go through every ready room and debrief every guy in that air wing, you get to know everybody. And was one thing I really enjoyed about being an LSO is that I felt comfortable walking into any ready room on the ship. I mean, frankly, when you're in a squadron, it's like you're in this, motorcycle gang, professional baseball team, however you want to look at it, right?
Wearing your cuts.
You're wearing your colors, you got your squadron patch on, and that's your team, right? And you don't often, feel comfortable being in the middle of the other team. It's like, it's weird, right? But as an LSO, I always felt comfortable because I knew all those guys, and I could walk in any ready room and tell it, hang around and tell jokes and make fun of the other guys, and they'd make fun of us. And it was great. And up on the platform, when you have a team of LSOs, each guy is representing each different type of airplane. Back when I started, you had all those different types of Grumman machines, and we'd all make fun of each other's airplanes and had fun up there, and it was all good natured. And a lot of those guys from those other pieces of equipment are still friends of mine to this day. I loved that whole thing of being able to go in those other ready rooms. That was really neat.
Yep.
And Lorenzo, you're actually slightly incorrect. I was fortunate enough to be in that 22 plane Tomcat flyoff from that last Tomcat cruise. Get back there and land at Oceana, and all the families were coming out, and actually one of the XOs, introduced me to his wife. It's like, oh, this is RJ. He saved my life a bunch of times out there.
There you go. Yeah.
And then
that's awesome.
I remember, I'm walking next to CAG, who's also in the flight, and then another 06 comes walking our way. Nasty Manazar is a famous Tomcat guy, became an admiral. But he's like, oh, RJ, heard great things about you from CAG. Nice to meet you. Nice work out there. Didn't see the guy for a couple more years, and then I'm at Tailhook, and he's now an admiral. Comes over, RJ, great to see you. How you been?
Oh, cool.
And then you
That's
see,
awesome.
like even at the fly-ins and all that kind of stuff. And other times I've been like at the club or whatever. Guys will introduce like, oh, that's RJ. He saved my life a bunch of times, and all that. It's so you. Not that you're looking for the recognition, and like I said, the two only words of validation that are any worth anything. Dane Paddles is thanks, Paddles. Hearing it on the radio after that rough pass that worked out pretty well.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, because I mean, again, it's a major part of that ship underway, and it's getting those jets back aboard safely. And anytime, any weather, day or night, and you guys, catch them left and right, literally, like it's what you do, and the training and the camaraderie and the culture, the family style, I only got one recommendation, RJ, moving forward, drop the minivan story out of the, at least just change the minivan line, like something like
it was a rental.
Yeah. Okay. You could say Corvette type, license plate frame. My other ride is an F-14 Tomcat.
That was one of the best nights of my life. I love telling that story.
It was a rental.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a rental. Yeah,
Fastest car in the world.
Yeah,
and I had 12 LSOs in the back, so it's perfectly authorized.
It's a clown car at that point. Yeah,
exactly. It was.
But it's funny because
that's awesome.
Being an F-14 show, so the guy that was in the back seat of that 22 plane fly off was Mort Downey, Brian Downey. Yep. He was a Rio, and he was my CAG OPSO when I was CAG paddles out in Japan. Phenomenal guy. I'd follow that guy off a cliff. Even as an NFO, he's awesome. And when I was 10 years old and the tall ships came to Boston, they do that whole thing where they're bringing all those big, massive ships. Well, the John F. Kennedy came in and pulled into Boston when I was 10 years old. And I remember my parents took me and we stood in line for 3 hours. And my brothers and I got to go up and tour the flight deck. And I took off like a bat out of hell, looking for the catapults, looking for the wires. And the one thing I remember of that is how big the F-14 was. You see it in the movie Top Gun, and it's super maneuverable. And then you see it up close and you're like, this thing is a building. Like, this is gigantic. Well, last year, so I remember we went up and, they had a couple pilots. It was probably their duty day, and they're probably hungover, and they're probably very junior. But as a 10-year-old, I don't know that. They're just guys in flight suits. So immediately they're my heroes, and they sign pictures of an F-14 or whatever. And so that picture to this day, right now, is hanging in my brother's bedroom back home. So last year, just out of curiosity, I was like looking at it because I was just hanging out back home. I was home on leave, and I was like, I wonder if I actually know any of these guys. And I look, and sure enough, there's Lieutenant Brian Downey had signed that picture for me as a 10-year-old. And I didn't know that had been hanging on that wall for 25 years. And I ended up working for that guy. And it's just like full circle. You meet some of the best people in the world in this job, and to have had that guy as an F-14 Rio sign that picture for me as a 10-year-old. And it's still hanging in my house to this day. And he was my boss years later. And I didn't even know that his autograph had been on my wall my entire childhood.
That's awesome.
Moore was more than just an F-14 Rio. He's a Tomcat guy. Again, there's a distinction between those who flew
fair. Yep.
So then he has one of Puck's shirts. You're saying that he's a Tomcat guy, self-proclaiming. Awesome show, guys. Thank you, everyone. Hey, on Facebook, you can find us over at F14 Tomcat ATG standing for All Things Grumman. And also find us on IG at F14 Tomcat. And don't ask how or why, but we're reaching 5.1 million people right now. And I'm not even sure how that's possible with an airframe. We haven't even flown in 20 years, but this is the leadership on the screen right now. You see that creates numbers like that, and it's the history left behind in their wake. So amazing. And yeah, absolutely. You can email us at F14Calverton@gmail.com. And also, I just want to throw out there the ACLS in the Tomcat. The reason why no one ever used it was because, well, you guys probably will confirm this yourself, but on Grumman's end of the report on it was that the delay for the throttle response of the TF-30 could not match the flight controls of the airplane. And the auto throttle setting wasn't what you... So by then, the F-110 goes in the airplane, and it's pretty much good to go. But by then, this airplane's been hand flown on a ship for a quarter of a century. They're not changing that. So you have the system now, able, but you have a pilot who's actually more able than the system because he does it day in, day out, anytime, any weather, day or night. And he's backed by leadership, as you see on this screen, getting them aboard. So you could see why ACLS wasn't, the first chosen option to say. Also, on a closing statement here, for the Secretary of War Department, would you please flag CHIMPO so we can keep this culture alive in today's Navy? And you can email me for his contact info. I'm good with that. I got your back, sir. I mean, just
I'll talk to anybody. I had cut me off. You need to. So I remember you guys had mentioned like a lot of people fly DCS and they're super interested in this stuff. And it was to what I was saying earlier. I love being able to do this because I feel like a lot of people that never got the chance to do this. It's fun to tell these stories. Very quick story. It's Thomas Fortner. He was the prior conductor of the South Dakota Symphony Orchestra. Just happened to follow me probably through you. It's where I got most of my followers from, Lorenzo. So I was a Hawkeye guy, and he does DCS on the computer. He's got some private hours, and so we developed a relationship. Just talking and message and whatever. And so he was doing the stuff trying to land on the boat and DCS and everything. And he was like, "Hey, like, I don't mean to be weird," because he's a conductor out in Europe now. And that's one of those jobs where I have the utmost respect for. If you can control an entire symphony orchestra, I think it actually has a lot of similarities to the things we do in the LSO platform, the things we do in the cockpit. And he says to me, he's like, "Hey, I got these passes recorded. I'm trying to get better at this. This is a hobby of mine. Would you mind taking a look at them and just messaging me like what I did wrong and whatever?" And so I took a couple looks at them, and I was like, honestly, I don't want to sound like a nerd, but I know we've never talked on the phone before. If you want to call me, man, like I will debrief these passes for you. And they're like computer generated passes. But this dude calls me. We end up talking for almost an hour about like the passes that he flew on DCS. And it was just one of those cool things where, like, the job that we get to do and the job that guy does conducting symphony orchestras. And I don't know, there's like this weird similarity and just people that love what they do and want to get great at something that matters to them. And I don't know. I just, like I said, I could talk about this stuff all day. So come and find me if you want.
DCS went next level because the LSO platform is now incorporated with the simulator and it's operational. So you can be on the platform waving someone landing and that platcam for line up everything at the crosshair. It's all right there with the wave off, for the pickle and the, it's next level. I'm glad that people have the interest in it, at least. I know a lot of people yell it's a game. I'm just glad that they have the interest and the whole wanting the desire to learn naval aviation.
I don't think
try
it's
to understand.
It's a simulator. I tell people that all the time. It's not a game. It's a
simulator. If you can't fly an F-14, you're not going to fly an F-14 in DCS. It's not a game in that sense, But I'm saying a lot of people write it off as, you're playing games. And I'm like,
right. I'm very impressed with it.
Yeah, definitely. But again, can't thank you guys enough. An absolutely awesome show. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us, guys. It was awesome. Appreciate it.